The wallet was bait. The meeting was staged. And Lena Hart, exhausted waitress, drowning in debt, had walked straight into Victor Hale's trap the moment she touched that black card. Now she stands in an interrogation room, 6 months pregnant, staring at surveillance footage that shatters everything. Her first noble choice, their violent courtship, the forced marriage that became real love, all of it designed. Victor sits behind bars for murder, believing she betrayed him. But the truth is worse. Their entire love story was a lie from the very first second. Want to see how Lena uncovers the truth and fights for a love built on deception? Watch until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights of Rosie's diner buzzed like dying wasps at 2:47 a.m., casting sickly yellow pools across cracked vinyl booths that had seen better decades. Lena Hart moved through the empty space with practiced efficiency, her shoulders aching from the double shift, her feet screaming inside worn sneakers that she'd reinforced twice with duct tape because new ones weren't in the budget. Wouldn't be in the budget for months, if she was honest. The math was brutal and simple. $1,700 for rent, $400 for her mother's medications, $200 minimum for utilities, and whatever scraps remained went to food that was mostly ramen and day-old bread from the bakery down the street. Her paycheck from Rosie's, when tips were good, might crack $2,000. When tips were bad, she fell short. Last month she'd been short. This month was tracking worse. She sprayed down the last table in Section 3, the one by the window where the streetlight created a circle of relative safety in a neighborhood that grew teeth after dark. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. 26 years old, but looking older, dark circles under hazel eyes. Blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that had started neat 12 hours ago and now listed to one side like a ship taking water. "You heading out?" Marcus called from the kitchen, already pulling off his apron. The night cook was a good guy, always made sure she got a meal during her shift, even when Rosie wasn't looking, always walked her to her car when he could. 5 minutes, Lena called back. "Just finishing up?" She turned toward the counter, ready to grab her things from the back, when something caught her eye. Booth 7, the corner spot where the business types sometimes sat when they were slumming or lost. Someone had left something behind, a wallet, but not just any wallet. Even from 10 feet away, even under the dying fluorescent lights, Lena could tell it was expensive. The kind of expensive that existed in a different universe from her duct-taped shoes and past-due notices. Black leather so supple it seemed to drink in the light, stitching so fine it was barely visible, and when she picked it up, her hands moving before her brain could weigh in on the wisdom of touching it, the weight told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't empty. Lena's fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. The first thing she saw was cash. Not a few bills folded casually, but a thick stack of hundreds held together with a silver money clip that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She didn't count it, didn't trust herself to count it, but there had to be several $1,000s at minimum. Behind the cash were cards, black cards, the kind she'd heard about but never actually seen, made from metal that caught the light with quiet authority. No spending limit, no questions asked. The kind of cards that opened doors to worlds where people like her didn't exist except to serve coffee and clear plates. And tucked into a slim pocket, a business card. Stark white, minimal text in sharp black letters. Victor Hale, The Meridian. No phone number, no address, just a name and a place that needed no further explanation if you were the kind of person who already knew. Lena had heard of the Meridian. Everyone in the city had heard of the Meridian. It was where power dined, where money played, where ordinary rules bent until they broke. And it was owned by a man whose name came up in whispers, whose reputation preceded him like a shadow that swallowed light. Victor Hale. They said he owned half the city's elite establishments, and the other half paid him tribute. They said politicians returned his calls before their own mothers. They said when Victor Hale entered a room, smart people found reasons to leave. They said a lot of things, and Lena stood there, holding what had to be $10,000 in cash, staring at cards that could buy anything, everything, and her fingers itched with a temptation so fierce it made her stomach turn. She could take it. Walk out right now, disappear the cash, toss the wallet in a dumpster 3 blocks away. Pay her rent, pay her mother's medications, buy actual groceries instead of ramen, maybe even fix the transmission in her dying car. $10,000 would change her life, would give her breathing room for the first time in years. But even as the thought formed, even as her desperate lizard brain screamed at her to take this gift from the universe and run, something deeper, something stubborn, and probably stupid, pulled her back. This wasn't hers, and taking it would make her a thief. More than that, taking it from Victor Hale would make her something worse, a target. Shit, Lena breathed, closing the wallet with hands that shook for entirely different reasons now. Shit. What? Everything okay out there? Marcus poked his head through the kitchen window, concern creasing his broad face. Yeah, Lena managed. Yeah, just someone left their wallet. I need to call them. Marcus's eyes widened when he saw what she was holding. Even from across the diner, even in bad light, the quality was obvious. Jesus, Lena, you sure you want to do that? She met his gaze. What else am I supposed to do? Leave it in the lost and found. Let Rosie deal with it tomorrow. You don't know whose that is. The name's inside, Victor Hale. Marcus went very still. Lena, put it down and walk away. I can't just... Yes, you can. That man is not someone you want to know. That's not our world. Leave it. But Lena was already pulling out her phone, already Googling the Meridian contact. Her hands moved with the same autopilot efficiency that carried her through double shifts, through exhaustion, through the grinding daily machinery of survival that left no room for smart choices or self-preservation. She found a number, took a breath, dialed. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, a woman's voice answered, professional and cool as winter steel. The Meridian. How may I direct your call? Hi, I found a wallet that belongs to Victor Hale. I'm calling to return it. Silence. Not the empty kind, but the weighted kind, heavy with implications Lena couldn't read. One moment, please. The hold music was classical, something elegant that made the diner feel even more shabby by comparison. Lena leaned against the counter, watching Marcus shake his head at her through the kitchen window, mouthing bad idea with the emphasis of someone who knew better. Maybe he was right. Probably he was right. Where are you? The new voice was male, clipped, efficient. Not Victor Hale. Lena somehow knew that instinctively, but someone close enough to the center of power that he didn't need to identify himself. Rosie's Diner, corner of 5th and Ashland. Stay there. Someone will arrive shortly. I have to close up soon, and Stay there. The line went dead. Lena stared at her phone, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Shortly, in a city this size, could mean anything. Could mean never. Could mean she was about to wait around for nothing while her exhaustion deepened and her poor choices compounded. They coming? Marcus asked, already knowing the answer. Yeah, they said shortly. Want me to wait with you? Lena almost said yes. Almost took the lifeline of having someone else present, another witness, a buffer between her and whatever was about to walk through that door. But Marcus had a wife and a baby at home, had already stayed an hour past his shift because Rosie was too cheap to properly staff the night shift. No, I'm good. You go on. I'll lock up after. Marcus hesitated, loyalty warring with exhaustion. You sure? Positive. Go home, Marcus. Kiss that baby. He left reluctantly, casting one more worried glance over his shoulder before disappearing into the kitchen to grab his things. Lena heard the back door open and close, heard his car start in the alley, heard the sound fade into the city's constant low rumble. And then she was alone. She busied herself with closing duties, counting the register, wiping down surfaces that didn't need wiping, anything to keep her hands occupied while her mind raced. Maybe this was stupid. Maybe she should have just left the wallet in the lost and found like Marcus said. Maybe... The sound of an engine cut through her spiraling thoughts. Not just any engine. Something expensive, powerful, purring with barely leash strength as it pulled up outside. Lena looked up. The car was black, sleek, and utterly wrong for this neighborhood. It looked like it cost more than the entire diner, maybe more than the whole block. Tinted windows hid whoever sat inside, but she could see the outline of at least 2 people. The rear passenger door opened, and Victor Hale stepped out. Lena knew it was him before he'd fully emerged, before she'd seen his face. There was something about the way he moved, the way the very air seemed to rearrange itself around him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her yearly salary, and when he turned toward the diner, when his eyes found hers through the window, every sound died. Not literally. Cars still passed on the street, somewhere a dog was barking, the city kept breathing its restless rhythm. But in the space between Lena and the man walking toward her door, sound became irrelevant. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only watch as Victor Hale crossed the sidewalk with measured steps, as he reached for the door handle, as he pulled it open and stepped inside. The fluorescent light seemed brighter suddenly, sharper, throwing his features into stark relief. He was perhaps 40, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples, sharp cheekbones, and eyes so pale they looked almost colorless, like ice, like winter frost, like things that cut without warmth. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His presence filled the diner the way a storm fills the sky, inevitable and absolute. "Mr. Hale," Lena managed, her voice smaller than she'd intended. I found your wallet." She held it out, her hand trembling despite her best efforts to keep steady. He looked at the wallet, then at her, and something flickered across his expression too fast to read. Surprise, maybe. Or something more dangerous. "You called to return it." His voice was deep, controlled, each word precisely weighted, not a question. "Yes." "Why?" The question caught her off guard. "Because it's yours." "That's not what I asked." He moved closer and Lena fought the urge to step back, to put the counter between them. 10,000 in cash. Multiple cards with no limits. You work double shifts in a diner that hasn't been renovated since 1987. You're wearing shoes held together with tape, and you called to return it. Why? Heat flooded her cheeks. Embarrassment at being so thoroughly seen, at having her poverty itemized with such clinical precision. But underneath the embarrassment, anger sparked. Because it's not mine. Most people would have taken it. I'm not most people. No. His pale eyes studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. No, you're not. Behind him, the driver remained in the car, a shadow watching through tinted glass. Backup or bodyguard or both. Lena couldn't tell, but the message was clear. Victor Hale didn't travel alone, didn't travel unprotected. He reached for the wallet, his fingers brushing hers briefly, cool skin, controlled touch, and Lena released it quickly, taking a step back to establish distance she desperately needed. "How did you know it was mine?" he asked, opening the wallet to check its contents with the efficiency of someone conducting inventory. "Your business card was inside, and you recognized the name. Everyone knows the Meridian, but not everyone knows me." "No," Lena admitted, "but I know enough to know I should return your property immediately." Something that might have been amusement touched the corners of his mouth. Might have been, but Lena wasn't sure Victor Hale was capable of genuine amusement. Wise. He pulled out the stack of cash, counted it quickly, then set $500 bills on the counter between them. Lena stared at the money. "What's that for?" "Finder's fee. For your honesty." "I don't want a finder's fee. I just wanted to return your wallet. Take it. Not a request." "Mr. Hale, I appreciate the offer, but how much are you short this month?" He asked it casually, like he was commenting on the weather, but Lena felt the question land like a blade between her ribs. "Excuse me?" "Your rent, your mother's medications, your car that's held together with prayer and luck. How much are you short?" The anger that had sparked earlier caught fire. "Son, that's none of your business." "You made it my business when you called. When you chose honesty over the easy money sitting in your hands." He gestured to the bills on the counter. "Take it. Consider it payment for a service rendered. I don't want your money. Everyone wants money. You need it more than most. You don't know anything about me. I know you're exhausted. I know you're drowning. I know you work yourself to bone because there's no other choice." His pale eyes held hers, unflinching. "And I know you're too stubborn to take help even when it's offered." Lena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I don't need your help." "No?" Victor tilted his head slightly, studying her like she was a puzzle he was solving in real time. Then what do you need, Lena Hart? Her name in his mouth stopped her cold. She hadn't told him her name. How do you... Your name tag. He nodded toward her chest, where the plastic tag proclaimed Lena in fading letters. Relief and embarrassment warred in her chest. Of course. The name tag. Nothing sinister, just observation, but the way he'd said it, like he'd known all along, like he'd been waiting to use it. I need to close up, Lena said, forcing her voice steady. You have your wallet. We're done here. Victor looked at her for a long moment, something calculating moving behind those frost-colored eyes. Then he pulled a different card from his wallet, not black this time, but cream-colored, elegant, and set it on the counter next to the cash. The Meridian is always looking for quality staff. People with integrity are rare. People with your particular brand of integrity are rarer still. He tapped the card once. If you're interested in a position that pays significantly more than this diner and doesn't require duct tape on your shoes, call that number. I'm not interested in... Keep the cash. Consider it a signing bonus if you call. Consider it a gift if you don't. He turned toward the door, movement fluid and final. Either way, you've earned it tonight. Mr. Hale, he paused, hand on the door, looking back over his shoulder. I don't take charity. It's not charity, it's recognition. His expression remained neutral, unreadable. There's a difference. And then he was gone, moving across the sidewalk to his waiting car with the same measured grace he'd arrived with. The door closed, the engine purred to life, and the black car pulled away into the night, taking Victor Hale back to whatever world he inhabited when he wasn't retrieving lost wallets from shabby diners. Lena stood alone in the fluorescent buzz, staring at the money and the card on her counter. $500. More than she made in a week of good tips. Enough to cover the gap in her rent, to buy her mother's medications without choosing between pills and food, to breathe for one goddamn month without the constant pressure of financial drowning. And all she had to do was take it. Her hand reached out, stopped, reached out again. Fuck, she whispered to the empty diner. She took the money. Hated herself for taking it, but took it anyway, because pride was expensive and she couldn't afford it anymore. She'd pay it back somehow, add it to the running tally of debts she owed the universe. But right now, tonight, she needed this more than she needed her integrity intact. The card, though, the cream-colored card with its elegant script and phone number that promised everything and revealed nothing, that she left on the counter. 3 days later, Lena stood outside her mother's apartment building, medical bills clutched in her hands, and did math that refused to add up. The medications had gone up again. Not dramatically, just enough to tip the delicate balance she'd been maintaining into full collapse. Even with the $500 from Victor Hale, money she'd used to pay rent and buy actual groceries for the first time in weeks, she was still $200 short. We can adjust the dosage, the pharmacist had said with practiced sympathy, stretch the current prescription a bit longer, which meant her mother would be in more pain, would sleep less, hurt more, slowly deteriorate while Lena watched and counted pennies that would never be enough. She'd picked up extra shifts at the diner, had begged Rosie for more hours, had offered to work mornings and nights, had done everything she could think of to bridge the gap. But Rosie was already overstaffed for the business they did, already paying out more than she probably should, and the answer was always the same. I'll see what I can do, honey. Nothing. The answer was nothing. Lena sat on the steps outside her mother's building, watching traffic pass, watching the city move forward while she stood still, drowning while everyone else breathed. The card was in her pocket. She'd meant to throw it away, had walked past 3 separate trash cans with every intention of tossing it, of closing the door on whatever Victor Hale represented. But each time, her hand had refused to release it, had tucked it back into her pocket with the stubborn logic of someone who knew better but couldn't help hoping. She pulled it out now, studying the simple elegance of the design. Just a phone number and a name embossed in subtle silver. The Meridian. What kind of job paid enough to solve problems like hers? What kind of work did a place like the Meridian require that made Victor Hale personally recruit a waitress from a dying diner? Nothing good, probably. Nothing safe, certainly. But then again, what did she have to lose? She was already drowning, already exhausted, already trapped in a cycle that was slowly grinding her down to nothing. Maybe it was a scam. Maybe it was dangerous. Maybe she'd regret this more than she'd regretted anything in her life. But maybe, just maybe, it was the lifeline she desperately needed. Lena pulled out her phone before she could talk herself out of it, before common sense and self-preservation could kick in. Dialed the number with hands that only trembled a little. It rang twice before someone answered. Not the same cool professional from before, but a different voice, male, younger, friendly. The Meridian, this is James. How can I help you? Hi, Victor Hale gave me this number. He said there might be a position available. Of course. Your name? Lena Hart. She heard typing, quick and efficient. Ah, yes, Ms. Hart. Mr. Hale mentioned you might call. We have an opening for front-of-house staff. When would you be available for an interview? Just like that. No questions about her experience, no request for a resume, just straight to scheduling. It should have been a red flag, should have sent her running, but Lena was too tired for red flags, too desperate for caution. Anytime. I work nights at my current job, but I'm free during the day. How about tomorrow? 2 o'clock? That works? Perfect. Do you need the address? No, I can find it. Excellent. Wear something professional. Mr. Hale values presentation. A pause. Welcome to the Meridian, Ms. Hart. The line went dead, and Lena sat staring at her phone, wondering what she'd just agreed to, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. But when she looked at the medical bills in her hands, at the numbers that wouldn't balance no matter how she tried, the wondering faded into determination. She'd made her choice. Tomorrow, she'd see where it led. The Meridian existed in a different universe. Lena had known it would be nice, had expected elegance, had braced for wealth. But nothing prepared her for the reality of stepping through doors that whispered open at her approach, of crossing a threshold into a world so removed from her own experience it might as well have been another planet. The lobby alone was larger than her entire apartment. Marble floors caught the light from crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime. Everything was black and gold and pristine white, colors that spoke of power and money and absolute control. Even the air felt different, cool and perfectly climate-controlled, scented with something subtle and expensive. A woman approached her immediately, wearing a suit that fit like it had been designed specifically for her body, her smile professional and measuring. Lena Hart? Yes? Excellent. I'm Margaret, head of house. Please follow me. She led Lena through the main dining room, currently empty but set for evening service with precision that bordered on art, and down a corridor lined with abstract paintings that Lena suspected were originals. Everything about this place screamed wealth so profound it didn't need to shout. They stopped at an office door. Margaret knocked twice, waited for a response Lena couldn't hear, then opened it. Ms. Hart is here for her interview, Mr. Hale. Victor Hale sat behind a massive desk, the same measured control she remembered from the diner radiating from him in waves. He looked up from whatever he'd been reading, those pale eyes finding hers immediately. Thank you, Margaret. That will be all. Margaret left, closing the door behind her with a quiet click that felt final. Sit, Victor said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Lena sat, hyper-aware of her thrift store blazer, her sensible shoes that weren't quite professional enough. The gap between her world and this one growing wider by the second. You called, Victor observed. You offered a job. I offered an opportunity. There's a difference. He set down whatever he'd been reading, giving her his full attention. Why did you wait 3 days? The question caught her off guard. I wasn't sure I wanted to. And what changed your mind? Lena met his gaze, refusing to look away, even though every instinct screamed at her to duck her head, to show deference, to acknowledge the massive power imbalance between them. My mother's medications went up. I'm $200 short and out of options. Honest. He said it like he was noting an interesting data point. Do you know what we do here, Ms. Hart? You run an exclusive restaurant. We run an exclusive club. There's a difference. Victor leaned back in his chair, studying her with that same calculating intensity from before. The Meridian caters to people who value privacy, discretion, and absolute quality. Our members pay significant fees for the privilege of accessing this space and the services we provide. Services? Fine dining, certainly, but also private meeting rooms, secure communications, and most importantly, assurance that what happens here stays here. His pale eyes held hers. We employ people who understand the value of discretion, people who can be trusted with information they might overhear, situations they might observe, conversations they must forget the moment they walk away. Lena's stomach tightened. You want me to spy on your customers? The opposite. I want you to serve them and remember nothing. That's difficult, yes. Also highly valued, which is why the position pays $5,000 a month, plus tips that typically equal your base salary. $10,000 a month. The number hit Lena like a physical force. $10,000 a month was more than she currently made in 6. $10,000 a month was breathing room, was security, was her mother's medications paid for with money left over for actual savings. $10,000 a month was also too good to be true. What's the catch? She asked. The catch is that you'll work in an environment where powerful people conduct business they prefer remains private. The catch is that you'll serve individuals who could make your life very difficult if you violate their trust. The catch is that once you enter this world, you'll see things that might make you uncomfortable, and your only option will be to serve the next course and pretend you saw nothing. And if I can't do that, then you'll be fired immediately and asked to sign an NDA with consequences for violation that would make your current financial situation look enviable. Victor's expression didn't change, but something in his tone sharpened. I'm being very clear about this, Ms. Hart, because I don't waste time on people who can't handle the requirements. This isn't a normal restaurant. These aren't normal customers. And the money you'll earn comes with strings that some people find unacceptable. Lena thought about her mother's apartment, about medical bills stacking up, about her car that would die any day and leave her without transportation to the job she depended on, thought about double shifts and duct-taped shoes and the grinding exhaustion of never having enough. I can do it, she said. You sound certain. I am. Victor studied her for a long moment. Why? Because I don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Then I'm choosing this. Lena leaned forward slightly, meeting his gaze dead on. I'm choosing to work somewhere that pays me enough to survive. I'm choosing to take care of my mother. I'm choosing to stop drowning. If that means serving people who want privacy and keeping my mouth shut about things I see, then that's what I'll do. Silence stretched between them, heavy with evaluation and decision. Victor's pale eyes never left hers, reading something in her expression that Lena couldn't name. Finally, he nodded. You start Monday. Front of house training begins at 9. Wear black. Margaret will provide specifics. You'll shadow experienced staff for 2 weeks before you work independently. Any questions? Just one. Lena hesitated, then pushed forward. Why me? Excuse me? You could hire anyone. People with actual experience in places like this, people who already know how to navigate your world. Why recruit someone from a failing diner who returned your wallet? Victor stood, moving around his desk with that same controlled grace. He stopped a few feet from her chair, close enough that Lena had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Because you did return it, he said quietly. Because when faced with an easy solution to all your problems, you chose integrity instead. That kind of honesty can't be taught, Ms. Hart. It's either there or it isn't. And in my experience, people who are honest when it costs them everything are the only people worth trusting. He extended his hand. Lena looked at it for a moment, this handshake that would seal her fate, that would pull her into a world she didn't understand, then reached out and shook. His grip was firm, cool, controlled, just like everything else about him. Welcome to the Meridian, Victor Hale said, and Lena Hart stepped across a threshold she wouldn't be able to uncross, into a world where her honesty would cost her more than she could possibly imagine. The first 2 weeks at the Meridian passed in a blur of information that Lena absorbed like someone learning a foreign language through immersion. Margaret ran training with military precision, teaching her the difference between service and servitude, between attentiveness and intrusion. Every gesture had meaning, every word was weighted, even silence had rules. You never approach a table unless summoned or scheduled, Margaret explained on day 3, demonstrating the proper distance to maintain. You never make eye contact unless addressed directly. You never, ever acknowledge anything you overhear. As far as you're concerned, our members exist in perfect silence except when speaking to you. Lena watched the experienced staff move through the dining room like ghosts, present but invisible, efficient but unobtrusive. They served $100 steaks and $1,000 bottles of wine to men in suits that cost more than cars, to women dripping in jewelry that could fund small countries. And through it all, they maintained expressions of perfect neutrality. She learned the members by sight, but never by name, unless they chose to provide it. The silver-haired man in booth 12, who always ordered whiskey, neat, and conducted conversations in languages that shifted mid-sentence. The woman who arrived at exactly 6 every Thursday, ate alone, and left tips that doubled the bill. The groups of businessmen who gathered in the private rooms upstairs, emerging hours later with handshakes that sealed deals worth millions. The money that flowed through the Meridian was staggering, casual, a rounding error to people who operated on scales Lena couldn't fathom. And Victor Hale presided over all of it with the same controlled authority he'd shown in that diner, moving through his establishment like a king surveying his domain. He didn't micromanage, had people like Margaret for that, but his presence was constant, watchful. Lena would catch glimpses of him in conversation with members, his expression neutral as always, but something in his posture suggesting that every word exchanged mattered more than it appeared. He rarely spoke to her directly during those first weeks. Would nod in passing, a brief acknowledgement that she existed, but nothing more. It should have been a relief, should have allowed her to fade into the background the way Margaret taught. But instead, Lena found herself hyper-aware of his presence, her shoulders tensing whenever he entered a room. "Don't let him intimidate you," advised Sarah, one of the senior waitresses who'd taken Lena under her wing. They were in the staff room during a rare break, Sarah touching up makeup that didn't need touching up. "Mr. Hale values competence over fear. Do your job well, keep your mouth shut, and he'll leave you alone." "Has he ever not left someone alone?" Lena asked carefully. Sarah's expression shifted, something guarded sliding into place. "There was a server last year. Started dating one of the members, thought she could leverage what she knew into a better arrangement. She doesn't work here anymore." "What happened to her?" "Nothing violent, if that's what you're worried about. But the NDA violations? Let's just say she'll be paying off legal fees for the next decade." Sarah met Lena's eyes in the mirror. "The rules exist for a reason. Follow them, and the Meridian will change your life. Break them, and the consequences are severe." Lena nodded, filing the warning away with all the others she'd collected. "Don't ask questions. Don't make assumptions. Don't get involved. Keep your head down and cash the checks." Her first paycheck arrived at the end of week 2, direct deposit that showed up in her account with an amount that made her check the banking app 3 times to confirm it was real. $5,000. Plus tips that brought the total to just over $8,000. $8,000 for 2 weeks of work. Lena sat in her car in the Meridian's employee parking lot, staring at her phone, feeling something crack open in her chest. Relief so profound it hurt, gratitude that tangled with guilt, and underneath it all, a whisper of unease she couldn't quite silence. Nothing was this easy. Nothing paid this well without hidden costs. But when she paid her mother's medical bills that night, when she bought groceries without checking prices, when she transferred money into savings for the first time in her adult life, the unease faded into background noise she could almost ignore. Almost. Her third week, Margaret declared her ready for independent service. "You'll start with the early dinner shift. Fewer members, lower stakes. Prove yourself there, and we'll move you to prime hours." The early shift turned out to be easier than training. The members who dined between 5 and 7 were generally older, more patient, less demanding. They treated her with distant courtesy, the way people acknowledged furniture that happened to be useful. Lena served, cleared, refilled glasses, and collected tips that sometimes exceeded her base hourly rate. She was good at this. Had years of diner experience that translated well despite the drastic upgrade in venue. The rhythm was the same: anticipate needs, move efficiently, stay pleasant but not intrusive. The only real difference was the price point and the weight of secrets that hung in the air like expensive perfume. By week 4, she'd stopped jumping every time Victor appeared in the dining room, had learned to recognize the subtle signs of his presence, the way staff straightened fractionally, the way conversation sometimes paused for a beat too long. He was the gravitational center around which the Meridian orbited, and everyone adjusted their trajectory accordingly. "Ms. Hart," his voice came from behind her as she was clearing table 6, and Lena turned to find him standing closer than she'd expected, those pale eyes assessing. "Mr. Hale, Margaret tells me you're performing well. I'm trying my best. Your best is exceeding expectations." He paused, and Lena got the sense he was deciding whether to say something more. "I'm moving you to prime dinner service starting Monday. You'll work the main floor." Pride and nervousness warred in her chest. Prime service meant bigger tips, more money, but also higher stakes. The members who dined during peak hours were the real power players, the ones who required absolute discretion because what they discussed could shift markets. "Thank you," Lena managed. "I won't disappoint you." "No," Victor said quietly. "I don't believe you will." He moved past her then, heading toward the private dining rooms upstairs, and Lena released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Prime service began with a trial by fire. The main floor during peak hours was a different beast entirely. Every table was occupied by people who radiated power and danger in equal measure. Conversations happened in low tones. Deals were struck over dessert. Alliances formed and dissolved between courses. And through it all, Lena moved with the careful precision of someone navigating a minefield. She learned to read the room in new ways, learned that when voices dropped to whispers, she should refill water glasses with eyes downcast, learned that some members wanted friendly service while others preferred to be ignored unless actively summoning her, learned the difference between productive silence and the kind that preceded violence. That last lesson came during her second week on prime service. She'd been assigned to the back corner, booths 9 through 12, where a group of men in expensive suits had been dining for over 2 hours. The conversation had been tense all night, voices sharp with barely contained aggression, but Lena had followed protocol: serve, clear, disappear. She was approaching to clear appetizer plates when one of the men stood abruptly, his chair scraping back with a sound that cut through the ambient noise. "You're trying to fuck me, Dimitri. We had a deal." The man across from him, Dimitri apparently, remained seated, but his expression went cold in a way that made Lena's instincts scream danger. "The deal was contingent on performance. You didn't perform. That's bullshit and you know it. The shipment was delayed because of your people." "Careful." Dimitri's voice dropped to something deadly soft. "Very careful how you finish that sentence." Lena froze 3 feet from the table, trapped between the need to retreat and the protocol that said she should continue service unless explicitly told otherwise. The other diners in her section had gone quiet, attention shifting toward the confrontation with the inevitability of people sensing blood in the water. The standing man's face flushed red. "You think you can threaten me? In here? You think Hale will—" Movement in her peripheral vision. Victor crossing the dining room with purposeful strides, his expression neutral but something dangerous coiling in the way he moved. He reached the booth before the situation could escalate further, his presence immediately shifting the dynamic. "Gentlemen," his voice was calm, controlled, but it carried absolute authority. "If you need privacy to discuss business matters, I'm happy to provide a conference room upstairs. But heated conversations disturb other members. I'm sure you understand." Dimitri stood smoothly, nodding to Victor with respect that bordered on deference. "Of course. My apologies, Mr. Hale. We were just finishing." "Were we?" The other man's voice shook with barely controlled rage. "Because I don't think we were finishing," Dimitri repeated, each word sharp as a blade. He pulled out his wallet, extracted several hundreds, and tossed them on the table. "Thank you for dinner. It's been educational." He walked away without another word, his associates following like well-trained soldiers. The man who'd been standing watched them go, his hands clenched into fists, breathing hard through his nose. Victor waited, patient as stone. Finally, the man seemed to deflate, rage draining into something closer to fear. "I apologize. Lost my temper." "It happens." Victor's tone suggested it shouldn't happen again. "However, I believe you've concluded your evening here. Ms. Hart will bring your check." It wasn't a suggestion. The man nodded jerkily, sinking back into his seat while his companions suddenly found the tablecloth fascinating. Lena moved on autopilot, retrieving the check from her pad, setting it on the table with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. The man paid in cash, didn't leave a tip, and left quickly with his group trailing behind. The dining room slowly returned to normal, conversations resuming their low hum. But Lena remained standing by the now empty booth, processing what she'd just witnessed. The casual threat of violence. The way Victor had diffused it with nothing but his presence and a few controlled words. The reminder that beneath the Meridian's elegant surface lurked currents that could pull someone under. Ms. Hart. She turned to find Victor standing a few feet away, his expression unreadable. Yes, sir? You handled that well. Most new servers would have panicked or fled. You stayed calm. I didn't do anything. You maintained composure in a tense situation. That's more valuable than you realize. He paused, studying her with those pale eyes that saw too much. How are you finding Prime service? It's different. Different how? Lena chose her words carefully. The stakes feel higher, like one wrong move could have consequences beyond just bad service. Because it could. Victor's honesty was almost refreshing. The people who dine here during peak hours are not forgiving of mistakes. They value discretion and competence. Provide both and you'll thrive. Fail at either and you'll be replaced immediately. I understand. Do you? He moved slightly closer, and Lena fought the urge to step back. Because understanding and accepting are different things. You've seen something tonight that most people never witness. A glimpse of how business is really conducted. How power actually functions. Some people find that knowledge disturbing. And if I do? Then you should quit now, before you see more. His expression didn't change, but something in his tone suggested this was a genuine offer, not a threat. There's no shame in recognizing your limits, Ms. Hart, but if you stay, you need to accept that this is the reality of the Meridian. Not all our members are criminals. Most are simply wealthy individuals who value privacy. But some operate in gray areas where the law bends to accommodate money and influence, and you will serve them all the same. Lena thought about her savings account, growing for the first time in her life. Thought about her mother's medications paid in full, about security she'd never imagined having. Thought about going back to Rosie's diner, to double shifts and duct-taped shoes, and the grinding exhaustion of never having enough. I'm staying, she said. Victor nodded slowly, like she'd passed a test she hadn't known she was taking. Then welcome to the reality of your new world. It will demand more than you expect, but it will also give you opportunities you can't imagine. He walked away before she could respond, leaving Lena standing in the aftermath of confrontation and choice, wondering exactly what kind of opportunities he meant. She found out 3 weeks later. The evening had started normally, full house, efficient service, members conducting business over wine that cost more per bottle than Lena used to make in a month. She'd been assigned to Section 3, which included several private booths along the far wall where the lighting was deliberately low and conversations were guaranteed to stay private. Booth 11 held a couple in their 40s, elegant and clearly wealthy, who'd been dining in comfortable silence. Lena had served their entrees and retreated to give them space, checking back at appropriate intervals to refill water and clear plates. She was approaching for what should have been a routine check when she noticed the woman looked pale, one hand pressed to her stomach, while her companion leaned forward with obvious concern. Sophia, what's wrong? I feel... The woman's words trailed off as she swayed slightly in her seat. Lena moved on instinct, crossing the remaining distance quickly. Ma'am, are you all right? She needs air, the man said, already standing. Help me get her outside. But when the woman tried to stand, her legs buckled. Lena caught her, supporting her weight as the woman's breathing became shallow and rapid. Around them, other diners were starting to notice, attention shifting toward the disturbance. Call 911, Lena said to the man, who was fumbling with his phone with shaking hands. To the woman, stay with me. Just breathe. Help is coming. Margaret appeared seemingly from nowhere, taking in the situation with a single glance. What happened? She collapsed. I think... The woman convulsed, her body going rigid in Lena's arms. Fear spiked through Lena's chest, but she held on, lowering the woman carefully to the floor as trained, protecting her head from impact. Clear the area, Margaret ordered, and staff immediately began ushering concerned diners back, creating space. Someone get Mr. Hale. The next few minutes blurred together, the woman seizing on the floor while Lena held her steady, while her companion hovered uselessly nearby, while Margaret coordinated with emergency services. Other diners watching with expressions ranging from concern to annoyance at the disruption. And then Victor was there, kneeling beside Lena with the same controlled precision he brought to everything. Medical history? I don't know, the man stammered. She has a heart condition, takes medication. What medication? I don't know. She handles all that herself. Victor cut him off with a look, then focused on the woman, checking her pulse with practiced efficiency that suggested this wasn't his first medical emergency. Pulse is weak but steady. Breathing stabilizing. Ms. Hart, stay with her. Keep her comfortable. Lena nodded, one hand on the woman's shoulder, murmuring reassurances she wasn't sure were heard. The seizure had passed, leaving the woman pale and disoriented but breathing. Paramedics arrived within minutes, professional and efficient. They loaded the woman onto a stretcher, asked questions that her companion answered badly, and transported her out through the service entrance to avoid disturbing the main dining room. The whole incident took less than 10 minutes from start to finish. Afterward, while Margaret dealt with the remaining diners and the man who'd accompanied the woman, Lena found herself in the staff bathroom, washing hands that trembled with aftershock adrenaline. She'd handled it well, knew she had, but the fear of not knowing what to do, of potentially making things worse, sat heavy in her chest. A knock on the door. Mrs. Hart? Mr. Hale wants to see you in his office. Lena dried her hands, straightened her uniform, and headed upstairs with her heart beating too fast for comfort. She'd been in his office exactly once before, the day she interviewed. Being summoned now felt ominous in ways she couldn't articulate. Victor stood by the window when she entered, looking out over the city with his back to the door. Sit. Lena sat, hands clasped in her lap to keep them still. He turned, studying her with that penetrating gaze. You handled the situation well. Thank you. Where did you learn emergency response? I didn't. I just reacted. Instinct then. Victor moved to his desk, leaning against it rather than sitting behind it. Less formal, but somehow more intimidating. That instinct probably saved that woman from serious injury. If you'd panicked or tried to restrain her during the seizure, the outcome could have been much worse. Is she going to be okay? The hospital called. She's stable. Apparently she'd been skipping her medication, and the combination of rich food and stress triggered an episode. He paused. Her companion wanted to thank you personally, but I explained that's not how we operate here. Instead, he left this. Victor held out an envelope. Lena took it, opened it, and nearly dropped it when she saw the check inside. $5,000. For less than 10 minutes of basic human decency. I can't accept this. Yes, you can. You earned it. I didn't do anything special. Anyone didn't. You did. Victor's expression remained neutral. That's the other reality of this world, Ms. Hart. When you help powerful people, they remember. They're generous in ways that might make you uncomfortable, but refusing their generosity is considered an insult, so you accept with grace and move on. Lena stared at the check, at money that represented 2 months of her old life earned in minutes. It felt wrong. Felt like she was being bought somehow. Like accepting this meant accepting something larger she couldn't quite name. But $5,000 was $5,000. She folded the check, tucked it into her pocket. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank your instincts. Victor moved back to the window, a clear dismissal. You can return to service. I believe Section 3 needs attention. Lena stood, headed for the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. Mr. Health, can I ask you something? You can ask. I may not answer. Why do you do this? Run a place like this, cater to people who operate in those gray areas you mentioned? Silence stretched long enough that Lena thought he wouldn't respond. Then, because someone will. And if someone will, it might as well be someone who understands the value of control, of boundaries, of rules that protect as much as they profit. He looked at her over his shoulder. The world you came from pretends these people don't exist. That wealth and power play by the same rules as everyone else. But here, in this space I control, there are rules. There are consequences. And people like that woman survive medical emergencies instead of being abandoned because witnesses would be inconvenient. So you're, what, providing a service? I'm providing a space where chaos is managed, where power is channeled, where the inevitable happens under controlled conditions instead of spiraling into something worse. His pale eyes held hers. You can judge that if you want. Most people do. But before you judge, ask yourself, would you prefer these people conducting business in places with no rules at all? Lena had no answer for that. She returned to service, to Section 3, where other diners had already forgotten the emergency, where business continued as always. But Victor's words followed her through the rest of her shift, through the following days, planning questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. A month later, everything changed. The evening had been unremarkable. Good service, generous tips, members conducting business with their usual discretion. Lena was clearing table 8 when she heard raised voices from the entrance, unusual enough that several diners looked up, attention drawn toward the disturbance. A man was arguing with Marcus, the evening host, his voice carrying across the dining room with the volume of someone drunk or angry, or both. I have a reservation. Check again. Sir, I've checked twice. You're not on tonight's list. If you'd like to make a reservation for another evening, I don't want another evening. I want tonight. The man pushed past Marcus, stumbling slightly, and Lena revised her assessment to definitely drunk. I know Hale. He'll want to see me. Margaret materialized from the back, her expression professionally concerned. Sir, I'm afraid if you're not on the reservation list, I can't seat you. However, I'd be happy to. The man's hand came up fast, shoving Margaret backward hard enough that she stumbled. Around the dining room, several members stood, chairs scraping back, the atmosphere shifting from curious to dangerous in a heartbeat. Security appeared, 2 large men in suits who'd been stationed discreetly by the doors. But before they could reach the drunk man, he pulled something from his jacket. A gun. The world went silent and sharp. Lena's brain couldn't process it at first, couldn't reconcile the weapon with the elegant surroundings, couldn't make sense of why someone would bring violence into this controlled space. But her body understood, flooding with adrenaline that made everything too bright, too loud, too real. Everyone stay where you are. The man waved the gun with shaking hands, pointing it generally toward the dining room. I just want to talk to Hale. Someone get me Hale. No one moved. Staff and members frozen in place, the kind of stillness that comes from survival instinct overriding everything else. And then Victor was there, descending the stairs from the private rooms, his expression as controlled as ever, despite the weapon aimed in his general direction. He moved with deliberate calm, hands visible, no sudden movements. I'm here. His voice cut through the tension like a knife. Put the gun down and we'll talk. You don't return my calls. Because you're no longer welcome here. You know why. That wasn't my fault. The deal went bad because you stole from my associate, because you broke the rules, because you proved yourself untrustworthy. Victor continued his approach, slowly closing the distance. Put the gun down before you make this worse. Worse? You fucking blacklisted me. No one will do business with me anymore. My life is... He swung the gun wildly, and in that moment of chaotic movement, Victor moved. Fast. Faster than Lena would have thought possible. He crossed the remaining distance, caught the man's wrist, twisted with brutal efficiency. The gun fired, deafening in the enclosed space, and plaster exploded from the ceiling. Someone screamed. Bodies hit the floor. Victor had the man on the ground in seconds, knee on his back, weapon kicked away. Security rushed in to help, zip-tying the drunk man's hands while he sobbed about unfairness and betrayal. Call the police, Victor ordered, his voice perfectly steady despite the violence of moments before. Tell them we have an armed intruder subdued. Marcus, check if anyone was injured by debris. Lena realized she was crouched beside table 8, arms over her head, ears ringing from the gunshot. She stood slowly, checking herself for injuries she didn't have, checking the members in her section who were all emerging from various defensive positions. No one was hurt. The bullet had gone into the ceiling. It could have been so much worse. Victor was already moving through the room, checking on members personally, his presence somehow reassuring despite the fact that someone had just fired a gun in his restaurant. I apologize for the disruption. Your meals tonight are complimentary, of course. If anyone needs medical attention or feels unsafe, I'll arrange transportation immediately. Professional to the last. Managing crisis like he managed everything else, with absolute control. The police arrived within minutes, took statements, hauled away the drunk man who was still crying about betrayal and blacklists. The members gradually returned to their meals or departed, the incident already becoming a story they'd tell at parties. Staff resumed service with shaking hands and forced smiles, and Lena stood in the aftermath processing what she'd seen. Victor disarming a gunman with efficiency that spoke of training most restaurant owners didn't have, managing a situation that could have turned into a massacre, protecting his space and the people in it with ruthless competence. Ms. Hart. His voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him standing closer than expected, a small cut on his cheek from where debris had struck him. Are you injured? No, I'm fine. You're bleeding. He touched his cheek absently. Minor. Are you sure you're all right? Yes, that was... She couldn't find words adequate for what had just happened. Frightening, yes. Victor studied her with those pale eyes. You can go home if you need to. No one would blame you. What about service? I'll have others cover your section. Lena thought about leaving, about running from this place where guns appeared and violence erupted. But leaving meant giving up everything she'd built here. Meant going back to barely surviving. Meant letting fear win. I'd like to finish my shift, she heard herself say, if that's all right. Something shifted in Victor's expression. Approval, maybe, or respect. You're certain? I'm certain. He nodded slowly. Then return to your section. And Ms. Hart, thank you for not panicking. Calm staff prevents hysteria among members. Your composure was valuable tonight. He walked away to deal with the police, leaving Lena standing in a dining room that had returned to normal with disturbing speed, as if guns and violence were simply part of the cost of doing business. Maybe they were. That night, lying in bed, unable to sleep, Lena thought about what she'd witnessed, about Victor's cold efficiency, about the way he'd protected everyone without hesitation, about the reality of a world where armed men appeared and business owners needed combat training. She thought about the envelope on her dresser, her paycheck plus tips, plus the bonus from the woman she'd helped. Thought about her mother's medical bills paid in full, about savings growing, about a future that finally seemed possible. And she thought about Victor Hale's words. Would you prefer these people conducting business in places with no rules at all? Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe the devil you could see was better than the chaos you couldn't. Maybe she was exactly where she needed to be, even if it terrified her. She fell asleep with those thoughts swirling, with the memory of gunfire still ringing in her ears, with the knowledge that she'd crossed another threshold tonight, one she couldn't uncross, one that marked her as someone who stayed when others would run, someone Victor Hale had noticed, and someone who, 3 weeks later, found herself standing in Victor Hale's office at 11 o'clock at night, exhausted from a double shift and completely unprepared for what he was about to ask her. Marry me? The words hung in the air between them, impossible and absurd. Lena stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for some indication that he was joking. But Victor's expression remained as neutral as ever, those pale eyes watching her with the same calculating intensity he brought to everything. I'm sorry, what? I need a wife. Temporarily. You need protection. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. Lena's brain struggled to process the statement, to find the logic hidden somewhere in those clipped sentences. I don't need protection. Yes, you do. You just don't know it yet. Victor moved to his desk, pulled out a folder, and slid it across to her. Open it. She did, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind reeled. Inside were photographs. Surveillance photos, she realized with growing horror. Photos of her leaving the Meridian after shifts, photos of her at her mother's apartment, photos of her car in the parking lot, in her own driveway, at the grocery store. Someone had been following her. What is this? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. This is what happens when you work at the Meridian and catch the wrong person's attention. Victor's tone remained matter-of-fact, like he was discussing weather instead of stalking. The man who brought the gun 3 weeks ago? He had associates. People who blame me for his arrest and the charges he's facing, and because they can't touch me directly, they're looking for leverage, softer targets. I'm not. Lena's throat went dry. I'm just a waitress. You're a waitress who stayed calm during an armed incident, who helped a member during a medical emergency, who has become known among my clientele as someone trustworthy and competent. He paused, letting that sink in. You're visible now, Ms. Hart, which makes you vulnerable. The photos swam in her vision. Someone watching her, tracking her movements, learning her routines. The violation of it made her stomach turn. So what, you want to marry me to? What? Make me less of a target? The opposite. I want to marry you to make you untouchable. Victor leaned back against his desk, arms crossed. A marriage to me sends a very clear message. You are under my direct protection. You are not leverage. You are not a soft target. You are mine, and harming you means declaring war on me personally. Most people aren't that stupid. Most people? No protection is absolute, but this is the best option available given the circumstances. Lena's hands shook as she closed the folder, unable to look at those invasive images any longer. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Because I don't believe for a second you're offering marriage out of the goodness of your heart. Something that might have been approval flickered across Victor's expression. Smart. You're right to question motives. What I get is legitimacy. Several of my business associates have been pressuring me to settle down, to present a more stable image. A wife provides that. Additionally, it complicates certain legal matters in ways that benefit my interests. So I'd be a prop, a shield you can use for business purposes. You'd be my wife, on paper and in public, with all the protections and complications that entails. He pulled another document from his desk. I've had my lawyers draft a contract. Read it carefully. It stipulates that this is a marriage in name only, lasting no more than 2 years. You'll live in my home, attend events as needed, and maintain the appearance of a genuine relationship. In exchange, you'll receive a monthly allowance of $50,000, full security detail, and at the end of the 2 years, a divorce settlement of $5 million. The numbers made no sense. Lena heard them, understood them intellectually, but couldn't reconcile them with reality. $50,000 a month. $5 million at the end. That was more money than she'd make in several lifetimes of waitressing. This is insane. This is business. This is... She gestured helplessly at the contract, at him, at the entire impossible situation. You can't just marry someone as a business transaction. People do it constantly. They're simply less honest about the terms. Victor's pale eyes held hers. I'm offering you a choice, Ms. Hart. You can refuse, continue working here, and hope the people following you lose interest before they do something more aggressive than taking photographs. Or you can accept, receive protection, and compensation far exceeding what any normal arrangement would provide, and in 2 years walk away with enough money to never worry about survival again. And if I refuse? Then I'll arrange alternative security measures, hire bodyguards, install better systems in your home and car, ensure you're as safe as possible without the marriage. But it won't be as effective, and it will draw more attention than we want. He paused. The marriage makes you boring, just another wealthy man's wife. Bodyguards make you interesting, a puzzle people will want to solve. Lena's mind raced through options that all felt wrong, through choices that seemed designed to trap her no matter which direction she moved. But underneath the panic, underneath the surreal horror of the situation, a cold calculation was forming. $5 million. Security for her mother, protection from people who were already stalking her whether she agreed to this or not, and 2 years of her life given to a man who treated marriage like a merger. I need time to think about this. You have 24 hours. After that, the offer expires and we pursue alternative arrangements. Victor straightened, moving around his desk in a clear dismissal. Take the contract, read it thoroughly. Consult a lawyer if you want, though I'd recommend someone outside your normal circles who won't ask questions you can't answer. Lena took the contract with numb fingers, the weight of it somehow heavier than simple paper should be. This is really happening. You're really asking me to... I'm offering you protection and compensation in exchange for services rendered. The fact that those services involve marriage is simply the most efficient legal structure for the arrangement. His expression remained impassive. Go home, Ms. Hart. Read the contract. Make your decision. And remember, this isn't about romance or love or any of the things people usually associate with marriage. This is about survival and mutual benefit. Nothing more. She left his office in a daze, the contract burning in her hands, the photos of her own stalking burned into her memory. The Meridian's elegant halls felt different now, tinged with menace she couldn't ignore. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every stranger could be watching. By the time she reached her car, Lena was shaking so hard she could barely get the key in the ignition. She read the contract 3 times that night, sitting at her kitchen table with coffee that went cold while she absorbed the legal language that spelled out exactly how her life would change. The terms were comprehensive, clinical, covering everything from living arrangements to public appearances to what happened if either party violated the agreement. The violations section was particularly interesting. If Victor broke the terms, she'd receive the full $5 million immediately plus damages. If she broke them, she'd forfeit all compensation and face potential legal action for breach of contract. The message was clear. He expected her to uphold her end of this bargain with the same ruthless efficiency he brought to everything else. There was also a confidentiality clause that would survive the marriage's dissolution. She could never discuss the true nature of their arrangement, could never reveal that it had been anything other than a genuine relationship that simply didn't work out. The penalties for violation would financially destroy her and potentially worse. Potentially worse wasn't defined. Lena suspected that was intentional. She called her mother in the morning, needing to hear a familiar voice, even if she couldn't explain what was happening. "Lena, honey, it's barely 7. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, Mom, I wanted to hear your voice." A pause, weighted with maternal concern. "What's wrong?" "Everything," Lena wanted to say. "I'm being stalked and my boss just proposed a business marriage. And I'm sitting here actually considering it because the alternative is hoping people with cameras don't escalate to violence." "Nothing's wrong. Work has just been intense lately. How are you feeling?" They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. Her mother's doctor appointments, the neighbor's new dog, the garden she was planning for spring. Normal things that felt impossibly distant from Lena's current reality. When she hung up, Lena stared at the contract again, at the section detailing the monthly allowance. $50,000. More than enough to ensure her mother had the best possible care, to hire private nurses, to move her into a better facility if needed. More than enough to solve every financial problem that had defined Lena's entire adult life. The price was just 2 years of living a lie with a man who viewed marriage as a business transaction. She called the number Victor had provided at exactly 11 o'clock, 24 hours after he'd made his offer. "Mr. Hale's office. This is Lena Hart. Tell him my answer is yes." Silence, then. "One moment, please." Victor came on the line within seconds. "Ms. Hart, I've read the contract. I have some questions." "Ask them." "The living arrangements. It says I'll have my own suite in your home." "How big is your home?" "Large enough that we can maintain separate lives under the same roof. You'll have complete privacy when desired." "And the public appearances? How often?" "Twice a month minimum. Business dinners, charity events, functions where my presence is expected and a wife's presence is beneficial. You'll be briefed before each event." "What about my job at the Meridian?" "You'll stop working there immediately. A wife of mine doesn't wait tables. We'll explain it as a natural progression in our relationship." Lena absorbed that, the loss of independence it represented. "And my mother?" "Will receive the best possible care. I'll arrange for private medical staff and ensure all her needs are met. Consider it a signing bonus." Of course he'd already thought of that. Victor Hale thought of everything. "When would this start?" "As soon as possible. We'll have a private ceremony this weekend, then announce the marriage to select circles next week." The public narrative is that we've been quietly seeing each other for months and decided to keep it private until we were certain. People will know that's not true. Some will suspect. No one will say anything. That's how this world works, Ms. Hart. Everyone lies, but as long as the lie is profitable to maintain, it becomes truth. Lena thought about that. About a world where reality bent to accommodate convenience, where marriages could be business contracts and everyone pretended otherwise. "I want one addition to the contract," she said. "What addition?" "At the end of 2 years, if I choose to leave, you don't interfere with my life in any way. No checking in, no protection detail I don't request, no presence in my world unless I specifically invite it. Clean break." Silence stretched for several seconds. Then, "Agreed. I'll have the lawyers add that clause." "Anything else?" "No. I'll sign." "Good." My driver will pick you up tomorrow at noon. Bring whatever you need for a few days. We'll arrange to move the rest of your belongings once you've seen the house and decided what you want to keep. Tomorrow? That's fast, yes. But the photos show increasing surveillance. Waiting serves no purpose. His tone softened fractionally. This is the right choice, Ms. Hart. I know it doesn't feel that way right now, but you'll be safer than you've ever been. Safe in a gilded cage. Better than unsafe in the world you came from. He wasn't wrong. Lena hated that he wasn't wrong. I'll be ready at noon, she said, and hung up before she could second-guess herself into paralysis. The driver arrived exactly on time in a black car similar to the one Victor had arrived in that night at the diner. The man who opened her door was professional, polite, and utterly silent during the drive to Victor's home. Lena watched the city change outside her window, neighborhood shifting from familiar to expensive to exclusive, until they passed through gates that probably cost more than her childhood home. The house beyond was less a house and more an estate. Modern architecture that somehow managed to feel both imposing and elegant, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed glimpses of interior spaces too vast to comprehend. Perfectly manicured grounds stretched in every direction, privacy hedges ensuring that whatever happened here stayed here. "Welcome home, Ms. Hart," the driver said, the first words he'd spoken since collecting her. Home. The word felt wrong, but Lena stepped out of the car anyway, a small suitcase in hand containing everything she'd thought to bring. Everything that mattered fit in one bag. Everything else was just stuff. Victor was waiting in the entrance hall, wearing casual clothes that probably still cost more than her monthly salary used to be. He looked different outside the Meridian, less formal, but no less controlled. "Ms. Hart, I trust the drive was comfortable." "It was fine." "Good. Let me show you to your suite, then we'll discuss the arrangements." He led her through rooms that felt like museum exhibits, past furniture that looked too expensive to sit on, up a sweeping staircase that belonged in movies rather than real life. The suite he showed her occupied the entire east wing of the second floor. It was larger than her apartment. Bedroom, sitting room, private bathroom with a tub that could fit 3 people, walk-in closet already stocked with clothes in her size. The view from the windows overlooked gardens that rolled toward a tree line in the distance. "This is..." Lena couldn't find words. "Yours. Completely private. I'm in the west wing. There's a shared living space on the first floor for when we need to maintain appearances, but otherwise we can exist separately." Victor gestured toward a tablet on the nightstand. "That controls everything. Climate, lighting, security. The staff has been instructed to respect your privacy unless you request their assistance." "Staff?" "Housekeeper, cook, groundskeeper, security team. They're all thoroughly vetted and discreet. You'll barely notice them most of the time." Lena set down her suitcase, feeling unmoored in this space that was supposedly hers but felt like borrowed luxury. "When's the wedding?" "Saturday. 2 days from now. Small ceremony, just us, and 2 witnesses for legal purposes. The lawyers will be here this afternoon with the final contract for you to sign." "And then?" "And then you're my wife." Victor's pale eyes studied her. "At least on paper. In practice, your life is your own as long as you maintain the public appearance when needed. I'm not interested in controlling your daily activities. Just my marital status." "Yes, just that." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I know this is overwhelming. Take today to settle in, explore the house, get comfortable. Tomorrow we'll discuss the specifics of public appearances and what I'll expect from you. But for now, rest. You're safe here." He left, closing the door behind him, and Lena was alone in a suite larger than anywhere she'd ever lived, preparing to marry a man she barely knew for reasons that made sense on paper but felt insane in practice. She sat on the bed, which was obscenely comfortable, and stared at her hands. In 2 days, she'd be Lena Hale. In 2 years, she'd be a divorcee with $5 million and a story she could never tell. And right now, she was just a waitress who'd returned a wallet and somehow ended up here. The wedding was exactly as clinical as Lena expected. A judge, 2 lawyers serving as witnesses, and vows that were legally binding but emotionally hollow. Victor slipped a ring on her finger, platinum band with a diamond so large it felt obscene, and she did the same for him with hands that trembled despite her best efforts. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Victor leaned in, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that lasted exactly long enough to satisfy legal requirements and not a second more. Professional. Impersonal. Everything this marriage was designed to be. Congratulations, the judge said, gathering his papers. May you have many happy years together. Lena wondered if he knew the truth, if the way he'd said it contained irony she wasn't supposed to catch. But his expression remained neutral, professional, and within 20 minutes he was gone, leaving Lena legally married to a man who'd already returned to his study to work. The announcement came 3 days later, carefully orchestrated through channels Lena didn't fully understand. Suddenly, people knew. Members at the Meridian congratulated Victor with knowing looks. Business associates sent gifts and invitations, and Lena found herself thrust into a role she had no preparation for: the wife of one of the city's most powerful men. The first public appearance was a charity gala, black tie and exclusive, where Lena wore a dress that cost more than her old car and jewelry borrowed from a collection Victor kept in a safe that required retinal scanning to open. She felt like a fraud walking into that ballroom on Victor's arm, surrounded by people whose wealth and influence operated on scales she couldn't comprehend. Smile, Victor murmured as they entered. Look happy. We're newlyweds, remember? Lena smiled, the expression feeling plastic on her face. Around them, people watched with obvious curiosity, trying to figure out where she'd come from, how she'd captured the attention of a man like Victor Hale. Victor, congratulations on the marriage. We had no idea you were seeing anyone. The speaker was a man in his 50s, distinguished and polished, extending a hand that Victor shook with practiced ease. We preferred to keep it private until we were certain. Lena, this is Richard Chambers. Richard, my wife, Lena. Wife. The word still felt foreign, wrong. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hale, Richard said, his eyes assessing her with uncomfortable intensity. I must say, Victor, you've been holding out on us. Where have you been hiding this lovely woman? She worked at the Meridian. I was impressed by her integrity and competence. The relationship developed from there. Victor's hand settled on Lena's lower back, possessive and claiming. Sometimes the best things in life surprise us. They circulated through the gala, Victor introducing her to a seemingly endless parade of powerful people whose names Lena immediately forgot. She smiled, made polite conversation, and felt like an actress playing a role she hadn't adequately rehearsed. You're doing well, Victor said during a rare quiet moment. They're curious but accepting. They think I'm a gold digger. Some do. Others assume you're pregnant. A few believe it's genuine. It doesn't matter what they think as long as they treat you with appropriate respect. His pale eyes scanned the room constantly, monitoring threats she couldn't see. Stay close. There are people here who would love to get you alone and extract information. What kind of information? Business details, personal weaknesses, anything they could use as leverage. He guided her toward the bar, his hand never leaving her back. Trust no one here except me. Everyone is friendly, but friendship in this world is transactional. A woman approached, elegant and beautiful, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Victor, darling, I heard the news. So sudden. Natasha. Victor's tone cooled fractionally. Allow me to introduce my wife, Lena. Lena, Natasha Volkov. Something in the way he said the name made Lena's instincts prickle. This woman was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with physical threat. Mrs. Hale? How unexpected. Natasha's eyes traveled over Lena, cataloging and dismissing. I must confess, when I heard Victor had married, I assumed it would be to someone from our social circle, someone with appropriate background and connections. The insult was delivered with a smile, wrapped in politeness that made it impossible to address directly. Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks, felt the urge to defend herself, to point out that she hadn't asked for this situation any more than Natasha had asked to be confronted with it. But Victor moved first. His arm slipped around Lena's waist, pulling her against his side with unexpected possessiveness. My wife is exactly who I chose to marry. Her background is irrelevant. Her character is not. And anyone who questions my judgment in this matter can take it up with me directly. The temperature around them dropped 10 degrees. Natasha's smile froze, something ugly flickering behind her eyes before she caught herself. Of course, I meant no offense. She inclined her head fractionally. "Excuse me, I see someone I need to speak with." She swept away, leaving tension in her wake. "Who was that?" Lena asked quietly. "Someone who expected a different outcome when I decided to marry. Someone who needs to understand that you are under my protection and insulting you means insulting me." Victor's expression remained neutral, but steel threaded through his voice. "That was a message, Ms. Hart. Not just to Natasha, but to everyone watching. You're mine now, and I protect what's mine." The words should have felt romantic, protective. Instead, they felt like chains settling around her, like ownership being claimed, but they also felt safe. The contradiction made her head spin. 2 weeks into the marriage, Lena was beginning to understand the patterns of her new life. Days spent largely alone in the vast house, reading or exploring the grounds, or trying to fill hours that used to be consumed by work. Evenings sometimes shared with Victor in the common areas when he was home, maintaining the illusion of normalcy. Twice weekly public appearances where she played the role of devoted wife. It was strange, surreal, and far more isolating than she'd anticipated. "You look bored," Victor observed one evening. They were in the main living room, Lena reading while he worked on a laptop, the picture of domestic tranquility that was entirely manufactured. "I'm not used to having this much free time." Most people would consider that a luxury. Most people aren't used to working 80-hour weeks just to survive. Lena set down her book. "What am I supposed to do all day? I can't work, can't see my old friends without raising questions I can't answer, can't live the life you had before." "I know." Victor closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. "I should have considered that. You're used to being productive, to having purpose beyond decoration. That was short-sighted of me. So what do I do?" "Whatever interests you. Take classes, pursue hobbies, volunteer with organizations that won't ask complicated questions. The money and time are yours to use however you want, within reason." Within reason being defined as nothing that embarrasses you or contradicts our cover story. Precisely. He stood, moving to the bar to pour himself whiskey. "Would you like something?" "No, thank you." He returned with his glass, settling into the chair across from her. "This isn't what you imagined when you agreed to marry me." "I didn't imagine anything. I just knew I needed the protection and the money." Lena studied him, this man who was her husband on paper, but a stranger in practice. "Do you ever regret this? Making such a clinical arrangement?" "No. Regret requires emotional investment I don't have in romantic entanglements." Victor sipped his whiskey. "This marriage serves my purposes. It protects you. The arrangement works." "It works," Lena echoed. "That's all that matters?" "In my experience, yes. Emotions complicate things, create expectations that can't be met. It's better to establish clear parameters and maintain them." "That's incredibly sad." Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those pale eyes. "Perhaps. But it's honest. And honesty, as you've demonstrated, has value." They sat in silence for a while, the distance between them measured in more than physical space. Lena thought about the man who disarmed a gunman, who protected his establishment with ruthless efficiency, who treated marriage like a merger but still ensured she was safe. She thought about the contradiction of Victor Hale and wondered if anyone actually knew him beneath the controlled exterior. The attack came on a Tuesday, during what should have been a routine trip to visit her mother. Lena had been cleared to make the visit, Victor insisting she take the driver and security detail, but allowing her to maintain that connection to her old life. She'd been looking forward to it, to a few hours of normalcy in her mother's modest apartment. The security team swept the building first, confirmed it was safe, then stationed themselves outside while Lena went in alone. Her mother looked better than she had in years. The new medications, the reduced stress from having her bills paid, the knowledge that her daughter was supposedly happily married to a wealthy man. All of it had contributed to improvement Lena could see physically. "You look tired, honey," her mother said, studying her over tea. "Is everything all right with Victor?" "Everything's fine, just adjusting to the new lifestyle." "It's a big change from waitressing to all this." Her mother gestured vaguely, encompassing Lena's expensive clothes, the security team outside, the life she was pretending to live. "Are you happy?" The question landed like a blade between Lena's ribs. Was she happy? She was safe, comfortable, financially secure for the first time in her life. But happy? "I'm adjusting," she said instead of answering. They talked for an hour about nothing important, and Lana felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders. This was real. This was familiar. The explosion shook the building. Lena was on her feet instantly, heart hammering, her mother crying out in shock. Outside the window, black smoke billowed from the parking lot. The security detail's car, she realized with horror. Someone had blown up the security detail's car. "Stay here," Lena commanded, already moving toward the door. "Lock it behind me and don't open it for anyone." "Lena, do it!" She hit the hallway running, pulling out her phone to call Victor even as her mind raced through implications. Someone knew she was here. Someone had targeted the security team. Someone was coming for her. Victor answered on the first ring. "What happened?" "Explosion. Parking lot. Security team's car. I'm in the hallway." "Get back inside. Lock the door. Backup is 6 minutes out." 6 minutes. That was an eternity when people with explosives were hunting you. Lena turned back toward her mother's apartment, but movement at the stairwell caught her eye. 2 men, moving fast, armed with handguns they weren't bothering to conceal. They saw her at the same moment she saw them. "There!" Lena ran. She didn't think, just moved on pure instinct, her body remembering every fire drill, every emergency procedure from years of working in places where seconds mattered. The hallway stretched ahead of her, doors blurring past as footsteps pounded behind her, getting closer. "Victor, they're in the building." "I know. Keep running. 4th floor, east stairwell. Now." Lena hit the stairwell door at full speed, taking stairs 2 at a time while her lungs burned and her phone pressed against her ear. Behind her, the door crashed open again, her pursuers refusing to give up. "They're right behind me." 3 minutes. Get to the roof access. There's a fire escape on the north side." A gunshot cracked through the stairwell, the bullet sparking off metal railings inches from Lena's head. She screamed, ducking instinctively, her phone clattering from her grip and skittering down the stairs. No time to retrieve it, no time for anything except running. 4th floor, 5th. Her legs screamed protest, but she pushed harder, driven by terror and adrenaline in equal measure. The roof access door loomed ahead, locked, and Lena hit it with her shoulder hard enough to send pain radiating through her body. Locked. She was trapped. Behind her, the footsteps slowed. They knew they had her cornered. "Nowhere to run now," one of them called up the stairwell, his voice carrying an accent Lena couldn't place through her panic. "Mr. Volkov just wants to talk. Come down nice and easy." Volkov. The name clicked into place. Natasha Volkov from the gala, her cold smile and colder eyes. This was revenge for Victor's public defense, for choosing Lena over whoever Natasha had expected him to marry. "I don't want to talk," Lena shouted back, buying time she didn't have. "Just leave me alone." "Can't do that. You're leveraged now. Should have thought about that before you married Victor Hale." Lena looked around desperately. The roof access wouldn't budge. No other doors, no windows, just concrete stairs and metal railings, and 2 armed men closing in. She could see them now, rounding the landing below, taking their time because they knew she had nowhere to go. Then she heard it. The distant wail of sirens, growing louder. "Backup's coming," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You won't make it out. We'll be gone before they arrive, and you'll be coming with us." The lead man stepped onto her landing, gun trained on her center mass. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Lena pressed back against the locked door, her mind racing through options that all ended badly. She could fight, but they were armed and trained, and she was a waitress who'd learned self-defense from YouTube videos. She could scream, but her mother was 5 floors down and the building was old enough that sound didn't carry well. She could... The roof access door exploded outward, not from a bomb or violence, but from someone on the other side kicking it open with enough force to send Lena stumbling forward. And through the opening came Victor Hale, moving with the lethal precision of someone who'd done this before, a gun in his hand and murder in his eyes. He fired twice before Lena could process what was happening. Both men went down, one clutching his shoulder, the other his leg. Not kill shots, but disabling ones. "Touch her again, and the next ones go through your heads," Victor said, his voice absolutely calm despite the violence he'd just deployed. He grabbed Lena's arm, pulling her toward the roof access. "Come on." Lena moved on autopilot, letting him guide her through the door and onto the roof where a helicopter was landing, its rotors creating wind that whipped her hair across her face. Victor's backup hadn't come by car, it had come from the sky. "Get in," he ordered, practically lifting her into the helicopter. He followed immediately, the door slamming shut as they lifted off. Below, the building fell away, sirens converging on the parking lot where smoke still billowed from the destroyed security car. Lena couldn't stop shaking, couldn't process what had just happened, how close she'd come to being taken, how Victor had appeared like something from an action movie to extract her from a situation that should have been impossible to escape. "Your mother?" Victor asked over the helicopter noise, his hand on her shoulder steady and grounding. "Inside her apartment, locked in, safe. I have people securing her now. She'll be relocated to a protected facility until this is resolved." "Resolved how?" Lena turned to look at him, really look at him, seeing past the controlled exterior to the cold fury underneath. "Those men said someone named Volkov sent them. Natasha's family?" "Her brother, Dmitry Volkov." Victor's jaw tightened fractionally. "The same man from the restaurant confrontation months ago. He's been escalating and apparently decided that targeting you was an acceptable strategy. You shot them." "I disabled them. There's a difference." His pale eyes met hers. "I told you that you were under my protection. That wasn't a casual statement, Ms. Hart. When someone threatens what's mine, I respond with overwhelming force. I'm not a possession. No, you're my wife, which in my world means the same thing. You are untouchable, and anyone who forgets that learns expensive lessons." He pulled out his phone, typing rapidly with one hand while the other remained on her shoulder. "I'm calling an emergency meeting with the relevant parties. This ends tonight." "What does that mean?" "It means Dmitry Volkov is about to understand that there are consequences for attacking a Hale." Victor's expression remained neutral, but something in his tone promised violence that wouldn't be quick or merciful. "He wanted to send a message by targeting you. I'm going to send one back." The helicopter landed on the roof of a building Lena didn't recognize, and Victor hustled her inside with efficiency that suggested he'd done this before. Down private elevators, through corridors guarded by men in suits who nodded at Victor with respect bordering on fear, until they reached what appeared to be a command center. Screens covered one wall, showing surveillance feeds from multiple locations. A conference table dominated the center of the room, already occupied by several men Lena vaguely recognized from events she'd attended as Victor's wife. The inner circle, she realized, the people who actually ran the machinery beneath the legitimate businesses. "Gentlemen," Victor said as he entered, his hand never leaving Lena's back, "we have a problem that requires immediate resolution." He laid out the situation with clinical precision: the attack on Lena, the Volkov connection, the escalation that could no longer be tolerated. The men around the table listened with expressions ranging from concern to calculation. "Dmitry's been pushing boundaries for months," one of them said. "This was inevitable. Then we make the consequences severe enough that no one else gets ideas." Victor pulled out a tablet, displaying information Lena couldn't fully process. "His shipments run through the ports on Thursday. I want them seized. His financial accounts are vulnerable to certain regulatory scrutiny. I want pressure applied. His associates who depend on our goodwill for their operations. I want them informed that continued association with Volkov means severed relationships with us." "You're declaring war," another man observed. "I'm ending one before it escalates further. Dmitry made this personal when he targeted my wife. I'm simply clarifying that personal attacks on my family result in the complete dismantling of his empire." Victor's pale eyes scanned the room. "Anyone have objections?" Silence. Whatever authority Victor held here, it was absolute. "Good. I want updates every 6 hours until Volkov understands his position." He turned to Lena. "You'll stay here tonight. The security is better than at the house until we've neutralized the immediate threat. I want to check on my mother. She's being moved to a private medical facility as we speak. I'll have video feeds set up so you can confirm she's safe, but you're not leaving this building until I say it's secure." It should have felt like imprisonment, should have made her angry that he was making decisions without consulting her. But Lena was too exhausted, too rattled from nearly being kidnapped, to fight about autonomy she wasn't sure she wanted right now. "Okay," she heard herself say. "I'll stay." Victor nodded, then addressed the room again. Get to work. I want Volkov broken by morning. The men dispersed with frightening efficiency, leaving Lena alone with Victor in a room full of screens showing a world she barely understood. He moved to one of the terminals, pulling up feeds until he found what he was looking for. There. He turned the screen toward her. Your mother. Safe in a private room with medical staff and security. Lena could see her mother on the screen, looking confused but unharmed, talking to a doctor in what appeared to be a high-end medical suite. Relief flooded through her so intensely her knees went weak. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me. This is my fault. I underestimated Volkov's willingness to escalate. Victor's expression remained controlled, but something in his posture suggested guilt he wouldn't acknowledge verbally. I put you in danger by marrying you. I should have anticipated this. You told me there were risks. I accepted them. Accepting risks and experiencing actual violence are different things. He moved closer, his hand coming up to tilt her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. You were almost taken today. Almost hurt because of who you're connected to. Most people would be traumatized. You're remarkably calm. I'm in shock, Lena admitted. It'll hit me later. Right now I'm just numb. Shock is better than panic. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, the touch surprisingly gentle from a man who'd just shot 2 people without hesitation. You did well today. You ran when you needed to, kept your head enough to follow instructions. That saved your life. You saved my life. If you hadn't gotten there, I was always going to get there. The moment you called, the moment I heard that explosion, nothing was going to stop me from reaching you. His pale eyes held hers with unusual intensity. You're under my protection, Ms. Hart. That's not a business arrangement anymore. That's a promise. Something shifted in the air between them, something that made Lena's breath catch. This was the most emotion she'd ever seen from Victor Hale, the most genuine connection beneath the controlled exterior. For a moment, he wasn't the cold businessman who'd proposed a marriage of convenience. He was a man who'd flown a helicopter into danger to extract someone who mattered. But the moment passed as quickly as it came. Victor stepped back, the professional distance reasserting itself. Get some rest. There's a suite connected to this room where you can sleep. I'll be here monitoring the situation. You're not sleeping? Not until Volkov is contained. He turned back to the screens, already refocusing on the problem at hand. Go, Ms. Hart. You've had enough excitement for one day. Lena went, but before she closed the door to the suite, she looked back at Victor, outlined against the glow of surveillance feeds and tactical planning. A man who'd married her for business reasons, but protected her with personal investment. A contradiction she was beginning to understand ran deeper than simple convenience. She fell asleep thinking about the way he'd said, "What's mine?" The way his hand had remained steady on her shoulder, the way he'd looked at her after confirming she was safe. Like maybe this arrangement meant more than either of them had planned. By morning, Dmitry Volkov's empire was in shambles. Victor explained it over breakfast in the command center, his tone matter-of-fact as he described the systematic dismantling of a criminal organization. Shipments seized, accounts frozen, associates defecting, and Volkov himself picked up by federal agents on charges that Victor's connections had ensured would stick. How long will he be in prison? Lena asked, trying to process the sheer scope of what Victor had orchestrated overnight. 20 years minimum if convicted, likely more given the evidence my people provided to the prosecutors. Victor sipped his coffee, looking no more tired than usual despite not sleeping. His sister Natasha is attempting to salvage the family interests, but without Dmitry's connections, and with most of their assets frozen, her options are limited. So it's over. The immediate threat is neutralized, but there will be others. There are always others in this world. He set down his cup, studying her across the table. The question is whether you want to continue living in this world now that you've seen what it actually involves. Lena thought about running through that stairwell, about armed men hunting her, about Victor appearing like an avenging angel to extract her from danger. Thought about her mother safe in a medical facility she could never afford otherwise, about security she'd never imagined having, about a life that terrified and tempted her in equal measure. The contract says 2 years, she said slowly. I signed it. I'll honor it. The contract has a clause allowing for dissolution under extraordinary circumstances. Being targeted by violent criminals qualifies. If you want to leave, I'll ensure you're compensated and protected. You want me to leave? I want you to make an informed choice. Victor's pale eyes held hers. This isn't the life you chose initially. You chose protection and money, not helicopter extractions and gang warfare. No one would blame you for reconsidering. Lena thought about that, about the option to walk away, to return to a simpler life where the biggest danger was angry customers and late rent. It would be easier, safer in the long run. But when she tried to imagine it, all she could see was returning to drowning, to the grinding exhaustion of never having enough, to watching her mother deteriorate while Lena counted pennies. And underneath that practical calculation, something else stirred. Something that had started when Victor defended her at the gala, that had grown when he'd appeared on that rooftop, that whispered maybe this cold businessman had depths she'd barely glimpsed. I'm staying, Lena said. Victor nodded slowly, something that might have been relief flickering across his expression. Then we need to discuss the next phase, which is making this marriage look more convincing. Yesterday proved that enemies will target perceived weaknesses. Right now, our relationship appears transactional, which makes you seem like leverage instead of family. We need to change that perception. How? By acting like a couple who actually chose each other. Public affection, shared appearances at less formal events, allowing photographers to capture moments of apparent intimacy. He paused. It will require more of you than the current arrangement. More time together, more performance, more blurring of the lines between contract and reality. Lena absorbed that, understanding what he was really saying. They'd need to fake a genuine relationship convincingly enough that enemies wouldn't see her as a weakness to exploit. Okay, she said. What do we need to do? Over the following weeks, Lena learned what it meant to perform intimacy with someone who approached it like a business strategy. Victor took her to dinner at restaurants where they were guaranteed to be seen, his hand always at her back or holding hers across the table. They attended gallery openings where he'd stand close enough that observers would read possessiveness, would lean in to whisper comments that looked like sweet nothings but were actually tactical assessments of the room. They were photographed leaving his office together, her wearing his jacket, him opening car doors with the attentiveness of a devoted husband. And slowly, the perception shifted. People began treating Lena differently, not as an anomaly or a gold digger, but as Victor Hale's actual wife. Someone important not just because of who she'd married, but because of how he treated her in public. The arm around her waist, the way his attention focused on her when she spoke. The casual intimacy of a man comfortable with his choice. It was all performance, all carefully calibrated to send specific messages. But sometimes, in unguarded moments, Lena caught something in Victor's expression that didn't feel like performance at all. Like the night they attended a fundraiser and Natasha Volkov appeared. Her family's empire in ruins, but her pride apparently intact. She'd approached them with a brittle smile, clearly intending some cutting remark. Victor had pulled Lena against his side, his arm wrapping around her with possessive authority. Natasha, I'd say it's good to see you, but we both know I'd be lying. Victor, and the waitress. Natasha's eyes glittered with malice barely contained. Still playing house? Still married and happy, which is more than I can say for your family's prospects. His tone remained pleasant, but steel ran through every word. I believe you're looking for new business opportunities now that your brother's enterprise has collapsed. Might I suggest legitimate work? I hear restaurants are always hiring. The insult landed like a slap. Natasha's face flushed red, but before she could respond, Victor had already dismissed her, turning his attention to Lena with a warmth that looked entirely genuine. Dance with me, he said, not quite a request. They moved to the dance floor, Victor's hand settling at her waist, while hers rested on his shoulder, and for several moments they simply moved together, the hostility of the encounter fading into background noise. You didn't have to humiliate her, Lena said quietly. Yes, I did. She came here to make you uncomfortable, to remind you of your origins, to suggest you don't belong in this world. Victor's pale eyes held hers. No one insults my wife. I thought I'd made that clear. Even when the wife is just a business arrangement? Especially then, the arrangement only works if people believe it's real. And belief requires defending you as vigorously as I'd defend an actual partner. Is that all this is? Maintaining appearances? Victor was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. It started that way. But somewhere between helicopter rescues and death threats, the lines blurred more than I anticipated. Meaning what? Meaning I find myself concerned about your well-being beyond what the contract requires. Meaning the idea of you being harmed generates emotional responses I didn't expect to have. Meaning this arrangement has become complicated in ways I should have foreseen but didn't. Lena's heart beat faster, something dangerous and fragile unfurling in her chest. Victor, don't. His hand tightened fractionally at her waist. Don't ask me to define what this is becoming. I can't give you romantic declarations or promises of genuine love. I can only tell you that you matter more than you should for a contract spouse, and that reality is inconvenient. Inconvenient, Lena repeated, something between laughter and hurt catching in her throat. That's one way to describe developing feelings. Feelings complicate things, create vulnerabilities. I've built my life on avoiding both. And yet here we are. And yet here we are, Victor agreed quietly. The song ended, but they remained on the dance floor for a heartbeat longer, caught in a moment that felt too real for their manufactured marriage. Then he stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself, and the spell broke. But Lena carried that conversation with her through the following days, through the continued performances and public appearances and carefully calibrated intimacy. She carried it when Victor worked late and she found herself waiting up to ensure he got home safely. Carried it when he asked about her day with what seemed like genuine interest. Carried it when their hands brushed and he didn't immediately pull away. The lines were blurring for both of them. And then, 2 months after the Volkov attack, everything changed again. Lena woke up feeling wrong, nauseous and exhausted in ways that coffee couldn't fix. She pushed through it for 3 days before the symptoms became impossible to ignore. The pregnancy test she bought at a pharmacy across town, where no one would recognize Mrs. Victor Hale, came back positive. Lena stared at the little plus sign, her world tilting on its axis. This wasn't supposed to happen. The marriage was in name only. They'd never, except once, 6 weeks ago, after a charity event where they'd both had too much wine and the performance of intimacy had blurred into actual intimacy in a way neither of them acknowledged the next morning. Once. One night where the lines between contract and reality had dissolved completely, and now she was pregnant with Victor Hale's child. She told him that evening in his study where he'd been working late, just laid out the facts with the same clinical precision he used for business discussions. Victor went very still. You're certain? 3 tests, all positive. I'll confirm with the doctor, but yes, I'm certain. Silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither had anticipated. This changed everything. A pregnancy meant the marriage couldn't be dissolved quietly in 2 years, meant a child who would tie them together permanently, meant complications that no contract could have foreseen. What do you want to do? Victor asked finally. I don't know. I need time to think, to process. Take all the time you need. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. He stood, crossing to where she remained frozen by the door. This is your choice, Lena. Entirely yours. I'll respect whatever you decide and ensure you have the resources to pursue it. The use of her first name, something he rarely did, made her chest tighten. And if I decide to keep it? Then you'll have the best medical care available and our child will want for nothing. The marriage contract becomes void under these circumstances. We'd need to renegotiate terms. Renegotiate, Lena echoed numbly. Because a baby wasn't part of the business plan. No, it wasn't. Victor's pale eyes searched hers. But some complications are worth adapting to. This would be one of them. Lena laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. We made a baby during a fake marriage. How is this my life? The marriage is legally real, even if the foundation was transactional. And this, he gestured vaguely toward her still flat stomach, makes it even more real. Whether you choose to continue the pregnancy or not, something fundamental has changed between us. Has it? Lena looked at him, this man who'd saved her life and paid her bills and defended her honor while maintaining emotional distance like a shield. Because sometimes I think we're actually becoming something real, and other times you're so distant I might as well be a stranger sharing your house. That's fair. Victor's hand came up, hesitating, then settled on her shoulder. I'm not good at this. At letting people close. At admitting I've become invested in outcomes I can't control. But you're not a stranger, Lena. You haven't been for a while now. Then what am I? You're my wife. The mother of my potential child. Someone I find myself thinking about when I should be focused on business. Someone whose safety and happiness have become more important than they should be for an arrangement that was supposed to stay simple. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't the romantic confession some part of her wanted. But from Victor Hale, it was more honesty than she'd expected, more vulnerability than he'd ever shown. I need time, Lena said again, to think about what I want, what's best. Take it. I'll be here when you're ready to discuss next steps. She left him in his study, climbed the stairs to her suite, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling while her hand rested on her stomach and her mind spun through impossible choices. The pregnancy felt like a test she hadn't studied for, a complication that exposed every crack in the foundation of her manufactured life. And underneath the fear and uncertainty, something else bloomed, something that felt dangerously like hope. 3 days later, while Lena was still processing her decision, while she and Victor circled each other with new wariness, the police arrived at their door. They had a warrant for Victor's arrest. Murder in the first degree. Victim: Marcus Chen, her old colleague from Rosie's Diner. And as they led Victor away in handcuffs, as he looked back at her with an expression she couldn't read, Lena's world shattered for the second time in a week, because the evidence they described was damning. And somewhere in the carefully controlled life she'd built, someone had decided to destroy it completely. The look in Victor's eyes as they led him away would haunt Lena for days afterward. Not fear. Victor Hale didn't do fear, but something colder and more devastating. Betrayal. Resignation. The look of a man who'd been expecting this knife but hadn't anticipated where it would come from. Victor, I didn't, Lena started, but the detective was already reading him his rights, and Victor's lawyers were materializing from somewhere, and the chaos of arrest swallowed her words before they could land. Don't say anything, one of the lawyers instructed her sharply. Not to the police, not to the press, not to anyone. We'll handle this. But they couldn't handle the way Victor had looked at her, like she'd confirmed every cynical expectation he'd ever held about trust and intimacy and letting people close. The house felt enormous and empty after they left. Lena stood in the entrance hall where Victor had been handcuffed, where officers had efficiently processed the arrest while she watched helplessly and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Marcus was dead. Kind Marcus, who'd walked her to her car, who'd made sure she ate during shifts, who'd warned her away from Victor Hale's world. And somehow, Victor was being accused of killing him. It didn't make sense. Victor had never even met Marcus as far as Lena knew, had no reason to harm a diner cook from her old life. The accusation was absurd, but the detective's words echoed in her memory. We have surveillance footage placing Mr. Hale at the scene. We have the murder weapon registered to a security company. We have motive established through witness testimony. This is not a mistake, Mrs. Hale. Lena pulled out her phone with shaking hands and called the only person she could think of who might have answers, Victor's head of security, a man named Thomas who'd overseen her protection details since the marriage. Mrs. Hale, I assume you're calling about the arrest. What the hell is happening, Thomas? Victor didn't kill anyone. He couldn't have. I agree, but someone went to considerable trouble to make it look like he did. Thomas's voice was grim. I'm already working with the legal team to review the evidence. In the meantime, you need to stay at the house. Security has been doubled. Don't talk to anyone. The detective said there was footage, and a weapon, and witnesses, all of which can be fabricated or manipulated by someone with resources and motivation. Mr. Hale has enemies, Mrs. Hale. This arrest is too convenient, too perfectly timed. Someone is making a move while he's vulnerable. Because of me. Lena sank onto the stairs, the weight of realization crushing. Because he defended me, because he went after Volkov, because he made enemies by protecting me. This isn't your fault. This is calculated revenge by people who've been waiting for an opportunity. You're not responsible for their choices. But Lena felt responsible anyway. Felt like every decision she'd made since finding that wallet had led to this moment, to a good man behind bars for a crime he didn't commit while she stood in his empty house carrying his child. She spent the rest of the day in Victor's study, surrounded by his things, trying to find some evidence of who might want to frame him. His computer was password protected, but his physical files were meticulously organized, and Lena went through them with desperate focus. Business contracts, property deeds, legal documents covering dozens of legitimate enterprises. Nothing that screamed murder conspiracy. But then again, Victor wouldn't keep evidence of criminal activity in clearly labeled folders. As evening fell, exhaustion pulled at Lena, but she pushed through it, driven by guilt and fear and something fiercer she didn't want to name. Victor had saved her life, had protected her mother, had been there when she needed him despite their arrangement being transactional. She owed him, more than money could repay, more than gratitude could express. The lawyers called at midnight with an update. He's been denied bail. The prosecution is arguing flight risk and danger to the community given his resources and connections. The arraignment is scheduled for Friday. Can I see him? Visitation will be complicated. As his spouse, you have rights, but given that you're also connected to the victim, you worked with Marcus Chen, correct? There may be restrictions. I need to see him. I need to tell him that she didn't betray him, that she believed in his innocence, that this baby growing inside her deserved a father who wasn't rotting in prison for a crime he didn't commit. We'll arrange it. But Mrs. Hale, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you have any reason to believe your husband is guilty of this crime? No, absolutely not. Victor had no connection to Marcus, no motive, no reason. This is a setup. Then we need you to help us prove that. Anything you remember, anyone who might have had access to Victor's weapons, any conversations about Marcus Chen or the diner, anything at all could be relevant. Lena's mind raced backwards, searching for details she might have missed. The night of my last shift at the diner, when I found Victor's wallet, Marcus was there. He saw it, warned me away from getting involved with Victor. Did anyone else witness this conversation? The diner was closed. It was just us. Lena paused, something nagging at her memory. Wait, before Victor arrived to pick up his wallet, I called the Meridian, spoke to someone on the phone, and when Victor showed up, there was a driver with him, someone who would have known about the connection between Marcus and me. That's good. We'll track down everyone who was aware of that interaction. If someone's framing Mr. Hale, they'd need to know about your history with the victim to make the motive believable. After the lawyer hung up, Lena sat in the darkened study and thought about that night, about finding the wallet, about calling to return it, about the choice that had set everything in motion. The wallet. Something cold slithered down her spine. The wallet that had been left behind in her section, perfectly positioned for her to find. The wallet containing enough money to tempt anyone, but with Victor's card conveniently included to enable return. What if it hadn't been accidentally left behind? What if the entire encounter had been staged from the beginning? The thought was insane, paranoid, the kind of conspiracy theory that made sense only in the exhausted early morning hours when nothing else made sense either. But it wouldn't leave her alone. Lena went to the security office in the East Wing, where Thomas was reviewing footage with 2 other team members. I need to see something. The night I found Victor's wallet at Rosie's diner. Do you have any records of who was at the Meridian that evening? Who might have had access to Victor's things? Thomas looked up, something sharp in his expression. Why? Because I'm wondering if the wallet was left there deliberately, if someone wanted Victor and me to meet. That's a significant accusation, Mrs. Hale. I know, but humor me, please. Thomas pulled up records, fingers flying across the keyboard. That was approximately 4 months ago. Let me cross-reference the Meridian's security logs with, here. The night in question, Mr. Hale attended a private dinner in one of the upstairs rooms. Guests included several business associates, and he stopped, his expression darkening. Interesting. What? Natasha Volkov was present that evening, before her brother's arrest, before the family fell from grace. She was part of a group discussing potential investments. So she would have had access to Victor. More than that, she would have been in proximity when he removed his wallet to settle the bill. Could have easily taken it, or had someone else take it, and planted it at your diner. Thomas leaned back, processing implications. If this was orchestrated, if someone wanted you and Mr. Hale to connect specifically, then they'd have been watching me, setting me up as a target before I even knew Victor's name. The pieces were assembling into a picture Lena didn't want to see. Someone had engineered their meeting. had watched her for who knew how long, learning her routines, identifying her as the perfect pawn. And when Victor had responded exactly as predicted, offering her a job, then protection, then marriage, the trap had been set. "We need to find proof," Thomas said, already pulling up additional files. "If the Volkovs planned this from the beginning, there will be evidence. Surveillance of you before the wallet incident, communications about the setup, something." They worked through the night, Lena fighting exhaustion and nausea, while Thomas and his team pulled apart digital records looking for the thread that would unravel the conspiracy. And slowly, piece by piece, the picture emerged. Surveillance footage of Lena at the diner taken weeks before she'd found the wallet. Financial transactions showing payments to someone named Marcus Chen, not her Marcus, but someone with the same name used to create confusion. Communications between Natasha Volkov and her brother discussing the Waitress project and Hale's weakness for honest women. They'd studied Victor, had understood that direct attacks would fail against someone so well defended, so they'd gone indirect, creating a woman he'd notice, engineering circumstances that would appeal to his values, manipulating him into a marriage that would provide the perfect frame. And Marcus, kind Marcus, who'd warned her away, had probably figured it out, had maybe even tried to warn Victor, and had been killed for it, his murder pinned on the man he'd tried to help. "We need to take this to the lawyers immediately," Thomas said as dawn broke. "This is evidence of a massive conspiracy. This gets Mr. Hale released." But when they tried to present the evidence, they hit a wall. "It's not enough," the lead lawyer said after reviewing everything they'd compiled. "Yes, it suggests premeditation and conspiracy. Yes, it raises questions about the Volkovs' involvement. But it doesn't definitively prove Victor didn't kill Marcus Chen. A good prosecutor will argue that even if the relationship was engineered, that doesn't mean Victor didn't eventually commit murder." "That's insane," Lana protested. "Why would he kill someone he had no connection to?" The prosecution's theory is that Marcus contacted Victor claiming to have information about you, that Victor, being possessive and controlling, met with Marcus and things escalated. They'll argue that your engineered meeting doesn't preclude subsequent genuine violence. So what do we do? We need to prove Victor was somewhere else when Marcus was killed. We need an alibi that can't be broken. Lena's heart sank. When did Marcus die? According to the coroner's report, approximately 3 weeks ago. Tuesday evening between 8 and 10 p.m. 3 weeks ago. Tuesday evening. Lena tried to remember where she and Victor had been, but the days blurred together, a constant stream of appearances and performances and carefully orchestrated normalcy. "Check the calendar," she said suddenly. "Victor keeps meticulous records. If he had an event that night, there will be documentation." Thomas pulled up Victor's schedule. Tuesday 3 weeks ago, he had a video conference scheduled with international partners. 8 to 9:30 p.m. from his home office. "That's not a complete alibi," the lawyer said. "He could have taken the call from anywhere, then left to meet Marcus. But the call would have records, participants who could verify he was present and engaged." Lena's mind raced. "And the house has security footage. Every entrance and exit is monitored. If Victor left the house that night, there would be evidence." They pulled the security footage, and there, clear as day, was Victor in his study from 8 p.m. until well past 10. Never leaving. Never stepping away long enough to commit murder across town. "This is it," Thomas said. "This proves he couldn't have done it." The lawyers took the evidence to the prosecution, who reviewed it with expressions that shifted from skepticism to reluctant acceptance. By Friday afternoon, the charges were dropped, and Victor Hale walked out of jail a free man. Lena was waiting outside, having refused to leave despite the press cameras, and shouted questions. When Victor emerged, squinting slightly in the afternoon sun, his eyes found hers immediately. She couldn't read his expression, couldn't tell if he was angry or relieved or still convinced she'd betrayed him. "Victor, He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. Not gently, not with the controlled precision she'd come to expect, but with desperate force, like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. "I know," he said against her hair. "Thomas told me what you found. I know you didn't betray me." Lena's arms came up around him, holding tight, while cameras flashed and reporters shouted, and the world watched Victor Hale embrace his wife with emotion he'd never shown publicly. I thought you believed I set you up, she whispered. For approximately 6 hours, yes. Then I thought about who you actually are and realized that betrayal isn't in your nature. You're too honest for that. Too fundamentally decent. He pulled back enough to look at her, his pale eyes intense. I'm sorry I doubted you. I'm sorry someone used me to hurt you. That's not your fault. That's on the people who engineered this situation. His hand came up to cup her face. But we're going to dismantle them. Together. Every person involved in this conspiracy is going to pay for what they've done. The lawyers intervened before the press could get too close, hustling Victor and Lena into a waiting car. During the ride home, Victor listened to Thomas's report on everything they'd uncovered, his expression growing colder with each revelation. So Natasha Volkov orchestrated the entire relationship, he said when Thomas finished. The wallet, the job offer, even the attack that led to our marriage, all of it designed to create the perfect frame. It appears so. The marriage made you vulnerable in ways you wouldn't have been otherwise, gave her brother's people a target when direct assault failed. And Marcus Chen figured it out somehow, probably recognized something off about the timing or the circumstances. So they killed him and framed me, knowing that my wife's connection to the victim would make the motive believable. That's our working theory. Victor was silent for a long moment, then, I want everything. Every communication, every financial transaction, every person who touched this conspiracy. And I want Natasha Volkov's remaining assets seized, her residual business connections severed, and her comfortable life destroyed so thoroughly she'll beg for the mercy I won't provide. Victor, Lena said quietly, she's already lost everything. Her brother's in prison, her family's empire is gone. She orchestrated a murder and tried to destroy my life. She doesn't get to walk away from that. His pale eyes met hers. I know you have compassion, Lena. It's one of the things I value about you, but there are situations where mercy is weakness, and this is one of them. I'm not asking for mercy. I'm asking if revenge is worth what it will cost you. What will it cost me? Your humanity. The parts of you that aren't cold and calculating, the parts I've started to see over these months. Lena's hand settled on her stomach unconsciously. The parts our child deserves to know. Victor followed the gesture, his expression shifting into something complex. You've decided then to keep the pregnancy. Yes, I'm keeping our baby, whether you want to be involved or not. Of course I want to be involved. That was never a question. He reached out, his hand covering hers on her stomach. But that doesn't change what needs to happen to the people who tried to destroy us. Then do what you need to do, but don't lose yourself in the process. Don't become the monster they tried to make you out to be. The car pulled through the gates of the estate, and Victor helped Lena out with the careful attention of someone aware they were carrying precious cargo. Inside, the house felt different, less like a stage set and more like a home they were building together despite the conspiracy that had brought them here. Over the following weeks, Victor's revenge unfolded with systematic precision. Natasha Volkov found herself facing charges for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and a dozen other crimes that Victor's lawyers had carefully documented. Her few remaining assets were seized through legal channels that Victor's connections expedited, and when she tried to flee the country, she was stopped at the airport and taken into custody. She'll spend the rest of her life in prison, Victor told Lena one evening. They were in the common living room, Lena reading while her hand rested on her growing belly, Victor reviewing final reports on the conspiracy's dismantling. Along with everyone who assisted in the frame, justice served. Does it feel like justice? It feels like closure, like protection for our family. He set aside his reports, moving to sit beside her on the couch. The threat is eliminated. We can move forward now. Forward to what? We have 8 months left on the original contract. Do we just continue the arrangement? The contract is void, has been since the pregnancy. We need to decide what we actually want, separate from business arrangements and protection needs. Lena looked at him, this man who'd saved her life and given her security and complicated her world beyond recognition. What do you want? Honestly, I don't know. This was supposed to be simple, a transaction that benefited both of us. But somewhere in the process of performing a relationship, I started wanting the reality. Victor's hand covered hers on her stomach. I want to be a real father to this child. I want to build something genuine with you, if you're willing. But I also understand if you'd prefer to separate, to take the settlement and raise our child independently. I'll support whatever you choose. You'd let me go? Even pregnant with your child? I'd hate it, but I won't trap you in a relationship you don't want. You deserve better than that. Lena thought about the months they'd spent together, the performances that had become real, the moments of connection that had surprised them both, the way Victor had defended her, protected her, shown her a glimpse of the man beneath the controlled exterior. And she thought about the child growing inside her, who deserved parents who chose each other rather than being bound by contracts and circumstances. I don't want to leave, she said quietly, but I don't want to stay in a marriage that's still transactional. If we do this, if we raise this child together, I need it to be real. No more contracts, no more performances, just us trying to build something genuine. I can't promise you romance or grand declarations. I'm not built that way. I know, but you can promise honesty and effort and being present for this child we're bringing into the world. Those things I can promise. Victor's thumb stroked across her knuckles. I can also promise that you'll be safe, that our child will be protected, and that I'll work every day to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me. That's enough. That's more than enough. They sat together in the quiet of their home, no longer a stage set, but an actual home, and let the weight of that decision settle. It wouldn't be easy. Victor would still struggle with emotional vulnerability, would still approach problems with cold calculation rather than warmth. Lena would still question whether she belonged in this world, would still miss the simplicity of her old life sometimes. But they'd chosen each other, not because of contracts or convenience, but because somewhere in the manufactured relationship, something real had grown. The baby was born on a Tuesday morning in May, after 14 hours of labor that tested every ounce of Lena's strength. Victor stayed with her through all of it, his hand gripping hers, his presence steady even when everything else was chaos and pain and overwhelming exhaustion. It's a girl, the doctor announced, and placed a tiny screaming bundle on Lena's chest. Lena looked down at her daughter, their daughter, and felt something fundamental shift in her universe. This small person, red-faced and perfect, was the product of a transaction that had become real, was living proof that sometimes the most unexpected paths led to the destinations that mattered most. She's beautiful, Victor said, his voice rough with emotion Lena had never heard before. She's perfect. What should we name her? They'd discussed options but never settled on anything definitive. Now, looking at their daughter, Victor said, Grace, because she's a gift we didn't plan for but needed anyway. Grace Hale, I like it. Victor's hand touched their daughter's tiny head with reverence that contradicted every cold, calculated move he'd ever made in business. Grace, meet your mother. She's the most honest, strongest person I know, and she's going to teach you how to be brave. Lena's eyes burned with tears she didn't try to hide. And this is your father. He's going to teach you that protecting the people you love matters more than anything else. They took Grace home 3 days later, to the estate that had become a real home somewhere along the way. Lena's mother, healthy now, thriving with proper medical care, was waiting to meet her granddaughter. Victor's security team had prepared the nursery with efficiency that bordered on military precision, and the house that had once felt enormous and empty now felt exactly the right size for a family beginning to understand what they meant to each other. Months passed. Grace grew from a tiny bundle into a laughing baby who had her father's pale eyes and her mother's stubborn determination. Lena found her rhythm as a mother, learning to balance the demands of an infant with the reality of being married to one of the city's most powerful men. And Victor discovered that fatherhood suited him in ways that business success never had. She smiled at me today, he told Lena one evening, wonder evident in his voice. An actual smile, not just gas. She recognized me and smiled. Welcome to being completely wrapped around a tiny person's finger. I don't mind it nearly as much as I expected to. Victor watched Grace sleep in her bassinet, his expression soft in a way that would have shocked anyone from his business life. I thought being a father would feel like another obligation, another role to perform. But this is different. Because you chose it, because she's real and makes you be real in return. Yes. Exactly that. He turned to Lena, his hand finding hers in the dim light of the nursery. I never thanked you properly for finding that wallet, For being honest when taking the money would have been easier. For walking into my world and refusing to let it corrupt who you are. I'm not the same person who found that wallet. That version of me was drowning. You pulled me out even if the method was unconventional. And you pulled me out of a life where everything was transaction and nothing was real. So we're even. They stood together in the quiet, watching their daughter sleep, and Lena thought about the journey that had brought them here. The wallet that had been bait. The meeting that had been engineered. The marriage that had started as business and become something neither of them had anticipated. Do you ever regret it? She asked. The way we started? The conspiracy that forced us together? No. Because fighting to prove my innocence, having you choose to believe in me, building this family from the ashes of someone else's revenge plot, it all mattered more than if we'd met conventionally. We were tested in ways most couples never face, and we survived it together. We did, didn't we? We did, and we'll survive whatever comes next the same way, together. Grace stirred in her sleep, made a small sound, then settled again. Victor's hand tightened on Lena's, and in that moment, everything that had seemed impossible 4 months ago, the conspiracy, the arrest, the revelation that their entire relationship had been engineered, faded into background noise compared to the reality they'd built. They'd been manipulated, been used as pawns in someone else's revenge. But they'd taken that manipulation and transformed it into something genuine, something worth protecting with the same fierce determination Victor brought to everything he valued. The wallet had been bait, yes. The meeting had been staged. But what they'd built from that fraudulent foundation was real, in ways no conspiracy could touch. And standing in the nursery with their daughter sleeping peacefully and their hands linked in the darkness, Lena understood that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unlikely beginnings. That truth could grow from lies, that love could bloom from transactions, that forgiveness, real forgiveness, meant accepting the complicated origins of their relationship and choosing to build something better anyway. I love you, Lena said quietly. I know you struggle with emotions and declarations, but I need you to know. I love you. Not the version you perform for business associates. Not the cold businessman who proposed a marriage contract, but the man who flew a helicopter into danger to save me, who stayed up all night when Grace had colic, who tries every day to be worthy of the family he never planned to have. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Then, I love you too. It doesn't come naturally to me, admitting that, feeling it, but it's there anyway, defying every logical reason I've built my life around. You matter. Grace matters. This family we're building matters more than anything else. It wasn't poetry, wasn't the romantic declaration Lena might have imagined in another life, but from Victor Hale, it was everything. They kissed in the darkness of the nursery, their daughter sleeping peacefully nearby, and let the weight of their shared history and uncertain future settle into something that felt like peace. The conspiracy that had brought them together was dismantled. The people who'd tried to destroy them were facing justice. And the marriage that had started as a business transaction had transformed into something neither of them could have anticipated. Something real, something chosen, something worth every complicated step that had led them here. And when Grace woke an hour later, demanding attention with the imperious cry of someone who knew her parents would always come running, Victor and Lena moved together with the practiced coordination of partners who'd learned to trust each other through fire. I've got her, Victor said, lifting their daughter with gentle competence. You rest. We're in this together, remember? I'll make the bottle, you change her diaper. Efficient division of labor, I can work with that. They moved through the midnight feeding with the ease of parents finding their rhythm, and Lena watched her husband, her real husband now, chosen rather than contracted, soothe their daughter with surprising tenderness. This was her life now. Not the manufactured performance of a business marriage, but the messy, beautiful reality of building a family with someone who'd started as a stranger and become her partner in every way that mattered. The wallet had been bait. The beginning had been a lie. But what they'd built from that deception was truer than anything Lena had known before. And that, she thought as Victor smiled at Grace, and their daughter grasped his finger with tiny, determined hands, was worth every complicated step of the journey. Worth the fear and the doubt, and the moments when everything had seemed impossible. Worth the price of forgiveness, both for Victor's initial deception and her own willingness to accept a transactional marriage. Because, in the end, they'd chosen truth over convenience, partnership over contract, and love over the logical reasons they'd both used to keep their hearts protected. And Grace, their unexpected miracle born from conspiracy and calculation, would grow up knowing that sometimes the most beautiful things emerge from the most unlikely beginnings. That love wasn't always planned, but it was always worth fighting for. That her parents had been brought together by manipulation, but stayed together by choice. And that forgiveness, the kind that rebuilt trust from ashes and created families from contracts, was the most powerful force in their world. The end.